Thank you, colleagues. We resume with Group 10, Skills Funding and Apprenticeship Levy Funds. I call Amendment 87 in the name of Miles Briggs, grouped with Amendments 88, 90 and 91. Miles Briggs to move Amendment 87 and speak to all amendments in the group. I'll just give Mr Briggs a moment.
There we go. Thank you. My amendments 87, 88 and 90 in this group build on the amendment which I brought forward at stage 2 and hoped ministers would understand the cross-party support for more transparency around the apprenticeship levy. Businesses and industry leaders across Scotland have argued for some time that we need to see stronger transparency around how the levy is applied and spent here in Scotland. As I stated in stage 2, the ability to follow funding raised from businesses in Scotland from the apprenticeship levy through our training system in Scotland is not easy. In fact, it is often impossible. The apprenticeship levy is a UK-wide tax on employers and is collected by HMRC. It came into force in 2017 and is set at 0.5 of the employer's annual wage bill. It is collected across the whole of UK, but the way funds are used and allocated differs. In Scotland, levy receipts go to the Scottish Government via the block grant. However, in England, levy-paying employers access their own digital accounts to spend funds directly on apprenticeships. That was a reform we also would have liked to see potentially in this bill, which hasn't been included. HMRC data shows that at least £875 million was raised by Scottish employers under the apprenticeship levy between 2020 and 2024. However, data shows that only £704 million has been spent on graduate, foundation or modern apprenticeships by Skills Development Scotland, Scottish Funding Council or the Student Awards Agency Scotland. This means that there's a £171 million black hole in what that should have gone on apprenticeships funding and hasn't, and has been diverted elsewhere. Now, I've consistently raised my concerns. Yes, happy to, Mr Mason.
John Mason.
I thank the member for giving way. I think he knows what I'm going to say because we had this debate at stage 2, but the money is not being diverted. The whole point of the Scottish of devolution and the Scottish block grant is that we get a certain amount of money, we decide in this place how we're going to spend it. Now that doesn't mean it's being diverted, it just means we make different choices.
Miles Briggs.
That's exactly where I think we need more transparency around where that funding's gone, and I'm sure Mr Mason would support that principle, especially given his work on different committees in this Parliament, that transparency around public funds should surely be something we all agree on and try to strengthen our systems around. And having listened to ministers and the reasoning behind them not supporting my amendment at stage 2, I've tried to help them and therefore brought forward a suite of other amendments in my name which seek to provide different options to improve the annual reporting on the apprenticeship levy and how it is spent in Scotland. So my amendment 87 inserts a requirement on Scottish ministers for each financial year to seek information from the UK Government on the amount of funding provided through the block grant adjustment as a result of the apprenticeship levy established as Part 6 of the Finance Act of 2016. Amendment 88 would establish an annual report on the use of apprenticeship levy funding in Scotland. With Scottish ministers must, for each financial year, prepare a report on the use of funding allocated to skills and training, and that's derived from the block grant adjustment associated. And the report would include a total amount of funding allocated by ministers that was derived from the block grant adjustment associated with the apprenticeship levy in each financial year. And perhaps the most important, and I don't see where ministers would not support this, is Amendment 90, because that would provide annual reporting on funding for skills and training, which would deliver a better understanding of where that apprenticeship levy is going, Mr Mason, and where it is being spent. Scottish ministers must, for each financial year, then prepare a report on the use of the funding they have allocated for skills and training. And why is this important? Well, colleges provide and have previously benefited from delivering flexible workforce development fund, for example, which was really positively evaluated and provided a great return on that investment, using funding from Scotland's share of the levy. So more transparency, I believe, would allow colleges and employers to see the return to Scotland from where that levy is actually both being raised and then spent, and what additional opportunities are being created for learners. I think it's a really important set of amendments around the levy. I know from debates and questions I've raised, specifically with the Deputy First Minister in the Chamber, in a response to a question of mine, she said the Scottish Government is not against more transparency and scrutiny around the apprenticeship levy. So I hope these amendments the Government will support, and I move amendments 87, 88 and 90 in my name.
Thank you. And I call Daniel Johnson to speak to Amendment 91 and others in the group.
Indeed. Thank you, Presiding Officer. And let me begin by supporting much of what Miles Briggs has just set out. Now, we can have long discussions about whether it's from John Mason about taking different choices, and we can probably have long discussions about the nature of the Barnett formula and block grant adjustments. The reality for employers is as simple as this. They are being asked to pay a sum of money that was meant to enable them to fund skills funding and be under their direction, and they cannot do that. And worse than that, because of the way that this all works, it actually deters them from undertaking certain skills things. Indeed, they prefer to do so in England. And finally, there is a degree of... Very happy to give way.
Jamie Hepburn.
Would he recognise employers being asked to pay that as a consequence of a UK government, the last UK government, introducing a policy unilaterally to fund their ambitions for apprenticeships in England without any form of engagement or consultation with the Scottish Government whatsoever?
Daniel Johnson.
Look, I think the member makes a fair point. And furthermore, I think there are a lot of people that would question whether it was the right policy and the right way of doing it. But the point is this. That notwithstanding, if you're an employer, a levy payer, essentially you are promised one thing which at least had some potential advantages, and those get wiped out because of the way the system works in Scotland. And frankly, if you're an employer, you don't care about the detail about Barnett consequentials or so on and so forth. Essentially, you're paying in, and you're not able to get it out in Scotland, and you can elsewhere. And that, I'm afraid I've given, and I think we may be stretching our colleagues' patience, because I was going to move on. It is an imperfect system, but I think the least we could do is actually ensure that there is transparency, that we seek to pass that money on, and critically preserve control. Which brings me on to my amendment. Now, unfortunately with groupings, that you don't always get control over how your amendments are grouped. And I would have actually rather my Amendment 91 was grouped with Amendment 105, because critically, I think what is important is that we have direct involvement from industry, both employers but also trade unions. Not only do they define the policy, but they also direct the funding. As I alluded to in a previous section of the debate, it looks like we have crashed the system this evening. I don't know if that's a good sign or a bad sign. Let's assume it's because of the quality of our debate. The key point is this, is that I think unless in the absence of clear strategy, unless you get that fundamental structure right, I think we are baking flaws into the system. That ultimately we want a responsive system, a system that doesn't require prediction or forecasting. It's one, because of employers' voice, industry voice, trade union voice is there, that we actually see the responses in the way that monies are used in order to deliver the right skills in the right way and at the right time. And what my Amendment 91 seeks to do in conjunction with that, with Amendment 105, is to ensure that we retain focus on skills funding. That this doesn't simply get folded and subsumed within other pots of funding, because there is stress and pressure within the system. And because the Scottish Funding Council to date has been responsible for college and university funding, I think there's an inevitable pressure for them to use this to ease some of those other pressures. So I think it is vital that we preserve clarity around the quantum of skills funding, and critically ensure that its control is directed as far as possible and as far as appropriate by those people that are actually aware of what is required in terms of skills delivery. So Amendment 91 would seek to ensure that, quite simply, that we preserve that transparency, that clarity around the skills budget, so we can track it. And I will speak further about the need, I think, for industry voice and to strengthen that within governance to get this strategy right when we come to Group 14. And with that, I will close. Thank you, Presiding Officer.
Thank you. And I call on the Minister.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. And I would just want to say initially I appreciate the engagement I've had with both members who have spoken previously in this group on this matter and with other members with the relevant employers and also business representative organisations. Miles Briggs's amendments 87 and 88 would require the Scottish Ministers to ask the UK Government for information on the amount of funding that Scotland gets from the apprenticeship levy and then report on the use of that funding. Yes?
Rachel Hamilton.
McPherson for taking the intervention, Presiding Officer. I'm very supportive of Miles Briggs' amendments, but there's one thing that I was hoping that it would include, and that would be that there would be a recognition of cross-border cooperation. And I think the Minister could be missing a trick with these amendments, because I think it's important that businesses employ apprentices that straddle both sides of the border are able to access funding through appropriate eligibility. And so I would ask the Minister whether this postcode anomaly could be dealt with through the reporting mechanism, or if it cannot, would the Minister implement significant policy changes through other means to change the eligibility criteria for those in the postcodes such as TD12 in my constituency?
Minister.
I thank the member for their intervention. I think at this juncture of the primary legislation, she raises matters that are quite complex and require engagement with a number of different parties. So I would urge her to follow up today's proceedings with written correspondence, and I can consider, along with the relevant employers and public bodies in the region, and crucially all other parliamentarians who represent the south of Scotland, whether there is collaborative work we can do together that might have meaningful and positive impact. Moving on, funding from the apprenticeship levy was discussed at stage 2 in the context of similar amendments as have been brought in this group. At stage 2, Stephen Kerr expressed his concerns about, in his view, the lack of transparency around the use of the apprenticeship levy in Scotland, and in particular how this levy was used to benefit employers. He argued that more funding should be allocated to apprenticeships linked to levy revenue. As John Mason, MSP and others pointed out at the time, and indeed Mr Mason has emphasised again today, quite rightly, a fundamental principle of devolution is that the Scottish Government can use its block grant funding from the UK Government in different ways to meet Scottish priorities. There would be no point in devolution if the Scottish Government mirrored the UK Government in every funding allocation. Yes?
Stephen Kerr.
You see, I don't think anyone's disputing the principle that John Mason raised and he's reiterating. What we are seeking is clarity and transparency around how much is being raised or is part of the block grant and how much is then being spent. Because that, as the Minister knows, because I know he's met employers, that is an issue they raised with him, they raised with all of us. And therefore, this is an amendment that seeks to address that issue so that we are completely transparent, something I think that he would probably, in the norm of conversation, agree with.
Minister.
I appreciate those points being raised, and the considerations about devolution aside, and spending decisions being on a devolved basis aside, as important as they are, the reasons why amendments 87 and 88 cannot be taken forward remain unchanged. In short, there is little point in placing a duty on Scottish ministers to ask for something when there is no way of making UK ministers provide an answer. Since the financial year 2020-2021, Scotland has received a Barnett Formula share of the UK Government Department for Education's apprenticeship funding through the block grant. The Scottish Government does not receive a dedicated allocation of apprenticeship levy revenue, meaning it is not possible to directly link the money raised from the levy to any specific funding stream, which relates, I would envisage, to some of the points that Jamie Hepburn made in his intervention when the policy was first introduced by the UK Government and the lack of consultation undertaken, as he articulated it, with the Scottish Government. So, Miles Briggs's Amendment 90 and Daniel Johnson's Amendment 91 both relate to funding for skills and training and how that is reported. They are unnecessary for a number of reasons. The SFC already prepares and publishes an annual report in which it outlines how it has allocated funding for specific purposes. That is already covered in the 2005 Act. In terms of Amendment 91, the appropriate mechanism for setting expectations around funding outcomes is already available through the terms and conditions of funding which the Scottish ministers can impose on the SFC. There is already a possibility under existing powers in the 2005 Act, therefore. And my Amendment 10 in Group 1 requires the Scottish ministers to create and maintain a national funding strategy, as we discussed earlier. The requirement to set out the outcomes and what the government seeks to achieve in terms of outcomes through funding tertiary education, skills and apprenticeship will be clearly addressed within that new strategy. And therefore, for these reasons that I have set out, and appreciate there's been a lot of dialogue previously on the apprenticeship levy, and for the reasons set out today and previously, I would ask Miles Briggs not to press his amendments 87, 88 and 90, and Daniel Johnson not to press his amendment 91. And if they do, I encourage members to vote against them. Thank you.
Thank you. And I call on Miles Briggs to wind up and press or withdraw Amendment 87.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. And I have to say, I haven't found the Minister's arguments convincing, and he will have heard from Green, Liberal Democrat, Labour and Conservative MSPs at committee that we want to see more transparency. You know, our mace in front of us has the 4 words wisdom, justice, compassion, integrity, but maybe transparency should also be there. So the government had an opportunity to bring forward amendments to work with us, but somehow hasn't done that work. That's where Amendment 90 I would have thought ministers would be able to support and would provide that opportunity for them to give Parliament that transparency, because we do not currently have that. And it is therefore down to members of the public and politicians in opposition parties to do freedom of information requests to find out what money HMRC has given the Scottish Government and then where the Scottish Government have allocated that. And I go back to my point, there is still £171 million which Scottish businesses have expected to be spent on the delivery of apprenticeships, which haven't been, and we don't have transparency over where that is. I will briefly, yes.
Jamie Hepburn.
The lack of transparency extends from the manner in which the UK Government expends its funding on apprenticeships. It may raise its money that way, but the manner in which the money comes to the Scottish Government isn't on the basis of how it's raised. It's provided on the basis of what's spent by the UK Government. And one of the challenges we saw, and I freely concede, I've not got a line of sight on it as I did at that stage, one of the challenges we saw after the introduction of the levy was, despite it raising a certain amount across the UK, apprenticeship numbers were going down in England. So the real question was, where was it being spent there?
Miles Briggs.
So the key part of this, and Mr Hepburn involvement in this should have also maybe generated some asking of questions over where that money is being spent in Scotland, I would imagine. That doesn't seem to have actually provided any more additional transparency. He often talks about this Parliament not being respected by Westminster. I'm not quite sure why the Scottish Government don't want to build stronger links with Westminster to find out where that money is being spent and indeed provide the transparency which we are asking. It can work both ways, and my amendments would provide that opportunity for that information to be made. Yes. Yep.
Stephen Kerr.
That point about the need for governments on this island to cooperate, but on a broader issue, should we not be learning from the successes and indeed the failures of apprenticeship systems in England and other parts of Europe? Why not?
Miles Briggs.
Absolutely, and this is what this bill could and should have actually included. I don't know why ministers haven't wanted more transparency. I've raised this with the Deputy First Minister, who specifically answered a question to me saying the Scottish Government is not against more transparency and scrutiny surrounding the apprenticeship levy. It sounds like their backbenchers are, and ministers have not taken forward that either. So I will be moving these amendments. I hope, yes.
Minister.
With respect to what Mr Briggs is articulating, does he appreciate the point that I made in my remarks that The issue with Amendments 87 and 88 is there is little point on Scottish ministers asking for something when there is no way of making UK ministers provide an answer. That's one of the key fundamental difficulties here. Miles Briggs.
Well, I think there's an opportunity if you don't ask, you don't get. And the Minister's not willing to ask. So I'm content that the Minister is maybe not expecting to get the information from the government I would hope he would, in terms of my amendments 87 and 88. But there is no excuse whatsoever for the government not supporting Amendment 90. I certainly hope Liberal Democrat, Green and Labour members across this chamber will unite behind that amendment, because it will provide us with the transparency from Scottish ministers. We don't need to ask Westminster for anything. We can get that transparency from Scottish ministers. If they reject it, they obviously do not want to change transparency around that. And I think for employers and industry across Scotland, the apprenticeship levy will continue to go to other things, not delivering more apprenticeships, which is what they expect that money to be going towards. And I move Amendment 87 in my name.
Thank you. And the question is that Amendment 87 be agreed to. Are we all agreed? The Parliament is not agreed. There will be a division and members should cast their votes now. The vote is closed. I call Sue Webber for a point of order.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. I couldn't connect. I would have voted yes.
Thank you, Ms Webber. We'll ensure that's recorded. The result of the vote on amendment number 87 in the name of Miles Briggs is yes 45, no 72. There were no abstentions. The amendment is therefore not agreed. I call amendment 88 in the name of Miles Briggs, already debated with amendment 87. Miles Briggs, to move or not move? Thank you. The question is that amendment 88 be agreed to. Are we all agreed? The Parliament is not agreed. There will be a division and members should cast their votes now. The vote is closed. I call Sue Webber for a point of order.
Apologies, Presiding Officer. I would have voted yes.
Thank you, Ms Webber. We'll ensure that's recorded. The result of the vote on amendment number 88 in the name of Miles Briggs is yes 43, no 73. There were no abstentions. The amendment is therefore not agreed. We move to Group 11, Reporting, Monitoring and Recommendations by the Council. I call Amendment 89 in the name of Miles Briggs, grouped with Amendments 48, 49, 92, 93 and 50. Miles Briggs to move Amendment 89 and speak to all amendments in the group.
Sorry, Presiding Officer, I'm just finding my notes on those. Where are they?
We'll just give Mr Briggs a moment or two.
I don't think I've got those. Place them, but I will give it a go off the top of my head. The annual reporting at stage 2 was something also I brought back for ministers to reconsider at stage 3. Again, looking towards recommendations within the Education Committee report around reporting. We want to, as a committee, look towards strengthen that. And engagement with the Minister has been helpful. A number of amendments were accepted at stage 2 of the bill. I hope that the Minister, in looking at these amendments in my name as well, would look towards supporting them, again, around more transparency. It's something which I hoped would have been a theme we could have collectively taken forward as part of this bill, and I move the amendments in my name.
Thank you, Mr Briggs. I now call on the Minister to speak to Amendment 48 and other amendments in the group. Minister.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. And to get straight to the point, I prefer Stephen Kerr's Amendment 50, which we worked together on, to Miles Briggs's Amendment 89, though I appreciate the points that were raised at stage 2, which encouraged us as a government to think more about annual reporting and to reach this point with Amendment 50 being put forward. It provides for a broader and more flexible approach and is not tied to the financial year or through the SFC's annual report. And ministers can also direct the SFC on the content of the report, which is already set up to include more of the SFC's functions. Moving to other amendments in the group, Amendment 93 by Willie Rennie deals with a similar issue. He is right to highlight the importance of reporting on financial sustainability, and I understand the intent behind requiring an independent report. However, I prefer Stephen Kerr's Amendment 50 for a number of reasons, and I will set these out now. Amendment 93 specifically requires the report to look at the financial sustainability of research among post-16 education bodies and at the financial sustainability of Scottish apprenticeships as a whole. Funding for research is, of course, not solely provided by the Scottish ministers. Funding can come and does come from UK sources, as well as private and philanthropic routes, and some of it may be commercially sensitive. The SFC rightly does not have as much of an oversight role in that area, and I believe that's where things should be. Moreover, it is very difficult to see how the financial sustainability of apprenticeships could meaningfully be assessed in this way. Should it involve looking at the businesses of employers and other training providers, that would be going too far into private entities, and there would be a lack of underpinning powers to deliver this. Instead, Amendment 50 requires the SFC to report on the performance of those delivering apprenticeships, as well as work-based learning and programmes of training for employment. That is important in terms of helping to ensure the quality from providers, rather than focusing on financial aspects. As I have said, I think we all agree on the importance of improved reporting, and I think all of these amendments share some common goals. But my view is that Amendment 50 strikes the better balance and is actually more extensive. Some of the aims of Amendment 93 might also be attainable through the power of Scottish ministers to give direction, and indeed Amendment 50 is broad enough to enable the SFC to commission an independent report as well as conduct its own. Moving on, Amendments 48 and 49 in my name tidy up some of the amendments accepted at stage 2. The bill now uses the term Fair Work Principles instead of Fair Work First. Using this language maintains consistency with other Scottish legislation and enables adaptation should the terminology around fair work change in the future. Fair Work First is also a specific government policy to require alignment with fair work through funding mechanisms. It is therefore inappropriate for the purposes of this bill. Through my Amendment 57, considered in the next group, ministers will be able to set out the meaning of fair work principles for the purpose of the SFC's functions by way of a direction to the SFC, allowing this key policy to remain responsive and adaptable over time. Willie Rennie's Amendment 92 requires that the SFC may only secure an independent examination into the financial sustainability or financial governance of the body where the majority of the members of the SFC decide it is necessary. This is, with respect, not workable. The SFC is responsible for setting out its own rules and how it operates at board and committee level. The 2005 Act makes provision for this. I understand that the intention behind this provision, Amendment 92, is to avoid decisions being made unilaterally or without clear rationale within the SFC. Decisions at the SFC board are and should be made together, with every member sharing responsibility for the SFC's actions. Sorry, that is with regard to the 2005 Act, not Amendment 92. The practical details of how this operates are rightly for the SFC's standing orders. I hope I have done enough to convince Miles Briggs and Willie Rennie that Stephen Kerr's Amendment 50 is preferable to their respective amendments. I therefore ask Miles Briggs not to press his Amendment 89 and Willie Rennie not to press his Amendments 92 and 93. If they do, I encourage members to vote against them, and I ask members to support Stephen Kerr's Amendment 50 and my Amendments 48 and 49.
Thank you, Minister. And I call Willie Rennie to speak to Amendment 92 and other amendments in the...
For those who aren't listening carefully to this, the Minister has just set out why he's supporting Stephen Kerr, and Stephen Kerr is why he's supporting the Minister. Who would have thought that Stephen Kerr would be the modern-day patsy for the SNP? Perhaps this is a new Stephen Kerr that we have never seen before. He may return, I suspect, to his usual form. But I congratulate Stephen Kerr for being able to persuade the Minister on this front, because I think my amendment is superior to his. My Amendment 93 aims to bring in what's already in place for Scotland's colleges, which is in effect Audit Scotland to conduct an annual review into the financial sustainability of universities. And I think that is something we should seek, especially after the couple of years that we've been through, particularly with Dundee University, but also problems at other institutions. Now, there is already the ability for Audit Scotland to be called in to do some investigations and some reviews into university finance, but I think it should be baked in to the system. It can supplement the work that the SFC already do. It doesn't have to duplicate, it can add on top. And of course, colleges already have the ability to raise finance from other sources. They're also involved in various other activities similar to what universities are doing already. So I don't quite see the difference between what universities already provide and what already colleges do, and they're investigated, they're reviewed by Audit Scotland, but the Minister seems to think it's unacceptable for universities to be reviewed in the same way. And what's important with this is that Universities Scotland are the body that's asking for this. They want this extra scrutiny, they want this extra investigation into their finances so that we can rebuild confidence in those institutions. They have a lot of respect for Audit Scotland and believe that they would add value into that financial sustainability investigation. So I'm sorry Stephen Kerr has sold us short and that he is prepared to go along with the Government's recommendations. I'll take an intervention from the Minister.
I thank Willie Rennie for taking the intervention and have been listening carefully. And to be fair to Stephen Kerr, the wording for Amendment 50 may have come in an email from my office, and we're grateful for the collaboration that he has shown. I think it's important to emphasise that while I appreciate the intentions of Amendment 93 and what Universities Scotland have articulated around it, and have been grateful for the engagement with them, our position is that Amendment 50 is far broader in its reach than Amendment 93, because Amendment 93 is limited to financial sustainability of further education, higher education, apprenticeships and research, whereas Amendment 50 focuses not only on financial sustainability but also on performance, and this would enable a more meaningful picture of how all the providers are actually doing and how the funding is providing value for money.
Willie Rennie.
This gets worse for Stephen Kerr, because the Minister has now said, to be fair to Stephen Kerr, words that have never ever been said in this chamber either. But if I can move on to Amendment 92. Now, there was much debate at stage 2 about the powers to scrutinise the financial sustainability, not just of the whole sector, but individual institutions following the events at Dundee University. And it was that careful balance to make sure that we didn't overreach, that we didn't threaten the ONS classification of what are independent charitable organisations. And my Amendment 92 is aimed at bringing in an extra robust mechanism to make sure that if we are going to institute an investigation into an individual institution like Dundee University, then it has to command the majority of the SFC board. And I hear what the Minister says, but because it is such a delicate matter that we've debated over the last couple of years, I think it is important to build in extra protections to make sure it's absolutely clear that there is no chance that the government are overreaching and dictating how these institutions are functioning. So I understand what Minister is saying about Amendment 93 and will reflect on his observations when we come to vote. But I hope he is persuaded by Amendment 92 and the need for an extra trigger in regard to investigating individual institutions.
Thank you. I now call Stephen Kerr to speak to Amendment 50 and other amendments in the group.
Got no credibility left in this Parliament. I've been accused by a Liberal Democrat, of all people, of selling out to the SNP government. I mean, I ask you. I mean, I really have landed face first in the mud here. If a Liberal Democrat feels they can accuse me of compromising with the United... Who voted for the budget? Can anyone remind me? I think it might have been the Liberal Democrats, actually, who claimed, in the words of Alec Cole-Hamilton, they'd saved the planet. They saved the world because they'd voted for the SNP budget. And then I've lived long enough, late into this fifth year of the sixth session of the Scottish Parliament, to hear an SNP minister recommend to SNP members that they vote for Stephen Kerr's amendment. It's a great moment, I can tell you. And then he lets the cat out of the bag by revealing that he had crafted the words on the back of my very skillful amendment. He's then honed it even further. Now, But there are serious points here. While I'm losing credibility and losing friends and are now well and truly fallen, I do think that it is important that we have adequate reporting. I accept the arguments that were made, by the way, from my colleagues Miles Briggs and, of course, Willie Rennie. In all seriousness, I do agree with what you had to say. I think, though, at least we've got the government to agree to some form of reporting, which I think is a form of progress in and of itself, because this amendment comes on the back of there being no required reporting mechanism in the bill. And the fact is that the Scottish Funding Council is no longer just going to be funding further education and higher education, but it's also going to sit at the centre of apprenticeships and work-based learning. This is a major shift. And, of course, there are funding that goes with it. Let me reclaim my credibility with a statement which, if this was an open session, I'd ask if members know who said this, but I think members on this side will know exactly who said this. Quote, "If the state wishes to spend more, it can do so only by borrowing your savings or taxing you more. It is no good thinking that someone else will pay. That someone else is you. There is no such thing as public money. There is only taxpayers' money." Yes, I think you might have guessed who that is. Margaret Thatcher. And that's absolutely the truth. It's axiomatic that the government doesn't have any money of its own. It's either borrowing money from the public or it's taking money from the pockets of the public. And what this report does at least do, am I getting an intervention to debate whether Margaret Thatcher said that? Am I? No, I'm not. I didn't think I was. The reality is that it is important that there is transparency and accountability. There's precious little of that in the minds of ministers who come to this place and present bills before this Parliament and who generally address this Parliament. Transparency and accountability would require us to have more information. And although this is not entirely what I respect Willie Rennie and Miles Briggs would like, it is something. And so I would like to place, and this will damn Ben McPherson's career forever, I want to put on record my thanks to the Minister for the way in which he is engaged with me on this amendment. Because in truthfulness, I started out with my remarks on the amendments that I presented today by saying that Ben McPherson picked up a bit of a guddle of a bill. I still think it's a guddle of a bill, but I do not doubt the sincerity of his intentions and the seriousness with which he has gone about trying to make something out of this bill. I still don't think it's much of a bill, but that willingness to engage constructively and his willingness to have an open door to opposition members in consideration of the amendments that we brought to him is something to his credit as a minister. And I think that deserves to be acknowledged. And that is the way, by the way, in my view, that you make good legislation. This is not going to be good legislation. I hate to disappoint the Minister, but it at least is an improvement, perhaps, on where it would have been had he not assumed office. If public bodies are to be trusted with billions of taxpayers' pounds and responsibility for shaping Scotland's future workforce, then Parliament is entitled to clear, regular and intelligible reporting on how well that system is holding up. This is not about second-guessing operational decisions. It's about ensuring that risks are visible, that performance is measurable, that ministers and the Scottish Funding Council can be held to account in an informed way. And that's why Amendment 50 matters, and why an amendment on reporting at all matters, because of the pressures already facing colleges and training providers and universities. None of these issues are hidden from the gaze of this Parliament or indeed the public. Financial sustainability in FE and in HE and in apprenticeships and in training is not an abstract concern. Colleges Scotland, for example, have repeatedly highlighted the difficulties they have in managing the money that has, for them, in their words, been cut in real terms over the course of this Parliament by at least 20%. So in short, Amendment 50 strengthens the bill without burdening it. It supports better decision-making, in my view. It does respect institutional autonomy while reinforcing accountability, and it fundamentally gives Parliament the information it needs to do its job properly. And again, just to double down on the appreciation I have for the Minister for the way in which he's engaged, I hope colleagues across the Chamber will see this amendment, even though it has this rather mangled and interesting history, and will support it to give us a system that's somewhat more resilient and more transparent over time.
Thank you. And I call on Miles Briggs to wind up, press or withdraw Amendment 89.
Thank you, Deputy Presiding Officer. And for a minute there, given Mr Kerr's Machiavellian nature, I was thinking he wasn't even going to move the amendment in his name. Luckily, our standing orders give us the opportunity for the Minister to do that. But I think as a set of amendments, this did provide for a health check on where the apprenticeship sector is. My amendment specifically, and I hope this is something the Minister will look at in terms of guidance, looked specifically around reasons for decreases in public-funded apprenticeships. And I don't think Mr Kerr's amendment necessarily captures that, but it is something I think will be important in the years to come. If apprenticeships aren't being delivered in some key sectors, why is that? So I hope he will take that on board, and I don't intend to move the amendment in my name.
Thank you. I can just confirm that Miles Briggs seeks to withdraw Amendment 89. Does any member object? No member objects. Therefore, Amendment 89 is withdrawn. I call Amendment 90 in the name of Miles Briggs. Already debated with Amendment 87. Miles Briggs, to move or not move?
Moved.
The question is that Amendment 90 be agreed to. Are we all agreed? Yes. Parliament is not agreed. There will be a division and members should cast their votes now. And the vote is now closed. The result of the vote on Amendment 90 in the name of Miles Briggs is yes 43, no 72. There were no abstentions. The amendment is therefore not agreed. I call Amendment 91 in the name of Daniel Johnson. Already debated with Amendment 87. Daniel Johnson, to move or not move?
Moved.
Question is that Amendment 91 be agreed to. Are we all agreed? Yes. Parliament's not agreed. There will be a division and members who cast their votes now. And the vote is now closed. And the result of the vote on Amendment 91 in the name of Daniel Johnson is yes 44, no 71. There were no abstentions. The amendment is therefore not agreed. I call Amendment 46 in the name of Ross Greer. Already debated with Amendment 2. Ross Greer, to move or not move?
Move.
Question is that Amendment 46 be agreed to. Are we all agreed? Yes. That is agreed. I call Amendment 47 in the name of Ross Greer. Already debated with Amendment 2. Ross Greer, to move or not move?
Move.
Question is Amendment 47 be agreed to. Are we all agreed? That is agreed. I call Amendment 48 in the name of the Minister. Already debated with Amendment 89. Minister, to move formally.
Moved.
Question is that Amendment 48 be agreed to. Are we all agreed? Yes. That is agreed. I call Amendment 49 in the name of the Minister. Already debated with Amendment 89. Minister, to move formally.
Moved.
Question is that Amendment 49 be agreed to. Are we all agreed? Yes. Parliament is agreed. I call Amendment 92 in the name of Willie Rennie. Already debated with Amendment 89. Willie Rennie, to move or not move?
Moved.
Question is that Amendment 92 be agreed to. Are we all agreed? Parliament's not agreed. There will be a division and members who cast their votes now. And the vote is now closed. Point of order, Neil Gray.
Presiding Officer, I couldn't connect. I would have voted no.
Thank you, Mr Gray. I'll ensure that is recorded. Point of order, Beatrice Wishart.
But I would have voted yes.
And the result of the vote on Amendment 92 in the name of Willie Rennie is yes 48, no 68. There were no abstentions. The amendment is therefore not agreed. I call Amendment 93 in the name of Willie Rennie. Already debated with Amendment 89. Willie Rennie, to move or not move?
Moved.
Question is that Amendment 93 be agreed to. Are we all agreed? Yes. Parliament's not agreed. There will be a division of members who cast their votes now. And the vote is now closed. And the result of the vote on Amendment 93 in the name of Willie Rennie is yes 49, no 68. There were no abstentions. The amendment is therefore not agreed. Call Amendment 5 in the name of Jeremy Balfour. Already debated with Amendment 1. Jeremy Balfour to move or not move?
Not moved.
That is not moved. Call Amendment 50 in the name of Stephen Kerr. Already debated with Amendment 89. Stephen Kerr to move or not move?
Moved.
Question is that Amendment 50 be agreed to. Are we all agreed? That amendment is agreed. It takes us to Group 12, exercise of the Council's functions. Call Amendment 51 in the name of Jackie Dunbar, grouped with amendments as shown in the groupings. Jackie Dunbar to move Amendment 51 and speak to all amendments in the group. Ms Dunbar.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. I'm pleased to bring forward two amendments which will ensure that regional and local needs in relation to skills planning and delivery can be considered and built into SFC activity. Is Evelyn Tweed needing an intervention?
I don't think so, Ms Dunbar. You may continue.
Section 20 of the 2005 Act requires the SFC to have regard in exercising all its functions to skills needs in Scotland, issue and affecting the economy in Scotland and social and cultural issues in Scotland. Amendments 51 and 56 in my name expand this so that all of these matters must also include consideration of issues within different localities in Scotland to take account of geographical diversity across the country. As an Aberdonian and an MSP for Aberdeen, this is particularly important for my locality, which has specific skill strengths and needs in relation to the energy industry, which of course is facing significant transition and change in terms of the skills employers will need in the future. My amendments are therefore, in my view, common sense and will strengthen the role and functions of the SFC in this important area. I encourage members to support my amendments 51 and 56, and I move Amendment 51.
Thank you. I now call on the Minister to speak to Amendment 52 and the other amendments in the group.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Jackie Dunbar's amendments 51 and 56, along with my amendments 52, 53, 54, 55 and 59, address the amendments that Pam Duncan-Glancy, Stephen Kerr and Miles Briggs brought forward at Stage 2. My amendments 52 and 59 move provision requiring the SFC to have regard to the economic, social and environmental priorities of the Scottish Ministers to a more logical place in Section 20 of the 2005 Act. Amendments 53, 54 and 55, also in my name, separate out the discrete issues of having regard to the desirability of protecting and promoting the interests of current and prospective learners on the one hand and promoting fair work principles on the other. Members will recall that with my Amendment 48 in the previous group, as well as Amendment 55 in this group, the bill now uses the terms fair work principles instead of fair work first, keeping the bill consistent with other legislation, current government policy and flexible to future policy development. My Amendment 57 enables the Scottish Ministers to issue a direction to the SFC setting out what is meant by fair work principles under this bill. This means that the application of fair work principles can be adapted from time to time as needed to ensure consistency with general government policy as it develops and may develop, and the direction can be specific to the context of the SFC carrying out its functions. Amendment 57 requires ministers to consult the SFC before issuing the direction. They must also consult employees of any body or persons funded by the SFC. Fair work is a key policy priority for the Scottish Government, and I recognise and value the substantial commitment that our universities and colleges have already made to progressing and promoting fair work, which means there is a strong foundation for continued progress and success. I know that some members were frustrated by not being able to go as far as they or I would like to with regards to setting out our expectations around fair work in the bill. This is, of course, a matter of fact because employment law is reserved to Westminster and this Parliament is restricted in what it can do in that area. However, I was pleased to announce last week that as a matter of policy and administrative practice, colleges and universities will be expected to adopt all fair work first criteria, and the SFC will look to include these as a condition of grant from April 2027. And it's been good to work with Ross Greer, MSP, and the Scottish Green Party on these matters. Amendment 58 from Stephen Kerr would also amend Section 20 of the 2005 Act. Subsection 1A currently requires the SFC, in exercising its functions, to have regard to skills needs in Scotland. The amendment would replace this with having regard to employer demand, labour worker shortages and skills needs at a national and regional levels in Scotland instead. I'm afraid I can't support that change, as I would cut across the intention both of the existing provisions in Section 20 and Jackie Dunbar's amendments to it today. Jackie Dunbar's amendments extend the need to consider regional and local variations, not just to skills and the economy, encompassing Stephen Kerr's concerns. So I hope he will be content with Jackie Dunbar's amendments. Yes?
Miles Briggs.
Welcome the amendments he's brought forward. One of my concerns around the definition of localities is what that will actually include. Is it his view that this is local authority level, regional city deal level, Chamber of Commerce level, or all of the above? And a definition of localities isn't necessarily within the bill. So I wondered, given the regional approach we often talk about and what is included in Stephen Kerr's amendment, why government wouldn't support that?
Minister.
I appreciate the point that Miles Briggs has raised, and we have, of course, when drafting these amendments together with Jackie Dunbar, thought carefully about the definitions within all amendments that the government has worked with members on, and we did work with Jackie Dunbar on those amendments, and I can say that the utilisation of the word localities there is something that has been considered as part of our legal evaluation of the amendments. And yes,
Miles Briggs.
So in the government says that the Islands Bill will also then cross all legislation. Is that then captured within localities?
Minister.
So I didn't quite understand Miles Briggs' question, whether it was related to the Islands Bill or this bill. Perhaps Miles Briggs might want to intervene and elaborate
Miles
further.
Briggs.
So, when a locality is being looked at, would the Minister, as part of the Islands Bill, see that as an individual island and the development needs, and specifically looking at what is now a definition within the Bill of Localities? I'm not sure it is Island Bill proof if there's not a definition.
Minister.
I'm happy to come back to Miles Briggs on that point, but I would just say clearly that, of course, the considerations around other acts and their interplay with this Act and amendments have been thoroughly considered prior to this Stage 3 debate, and I'm confident that the amendment as drafted in the name of Jackie Dunbar 56 is competent and will be able to be utilised for the common good of different areas of Scotland in the way it is envisaged. If I may move on, Presiding Officer, I had just got to the point of talking about Stephen Kerr's Amendment 58 and Jackie Dunbar's amendments, and on the basis of what I set out prior to Miles Briggs intervening on me, I would ask that Stephen Kerr does not press his Amendment 58, but if he does, I would urge other members to vote against it. However, I would invite members to vote for all of my amendments and Jackie Dunbar's Amendments 51 and 56 in Group 12. Thanks.
Thank you. I'm now calling Stephen Kerr to speak to Amendment 58 and other amendments in the group. Mr Kerr.
Well, my intention is to push Amendment 58 because, frankly, it again attempts to anchor the bill firmly in the real economy. And there are further amendments which I think come into line with what Miles Briggs' intervention when the Minister was talking about. The Scottish Funding Council takes on its expanded role. As it does so, there is a risk. And it's not theoretical, it's a very practical risk. The decision-making drifts inward, internally, towards process, towards structures, internal coherence, and away from the people who ultimately make the system work. And that's going to be employers. Amendment 58 requires the Council, when exercising its functions, to have explicit regard to Scotland's employers. And that matters because employers are not an optional stakeholder in skills policy. They are the end users of the system. They create the jobs. They invest in training. They take on apprentices. They translate skills into productivity, wages and growth. And if we get that relationship wrong, the consequences are predictable. We end up with qualifications that look impressive but don't align with demand. Perhaps we've already got too much of that in our economy, frankly. We see apprenticeships that are well-intentioned, but poorly matched to the labour market. That's an unwanted consequence if you don't root the system in the real economy. And we perpetuate the gap between education policy and economic reality that Scotland, frankly, has struggled with for years. And that was very much part of the purpose behind the review on post-school education and training that was supposed to create this brand new world that we don't have in this bill. This amendment, 58, is about closing that gap between, the world of rarefied theory and the reality where there are jobs. And from my perspective, this is simply common sense. Economic growth, economic activity doesn't happen by accident. It happens when education and skills policy is aligned with enterprise, innovation and investment. And that alignment only works if employers are consistently and consciously factored in to how decisions are made. And I want to stress that this amendment doesn't elevate employers above learners or colleges or providers. It doesn't hand veto powers to business interests. That would be ridiculous. What it does is ensure that when the Council is making decisions about funding priorities or delivery models, it actively considers how those decisions land in the workplace. And that's what Amendment 58 is all about. It also complements other changes in the bill, at least the amendments that I previously brought forward. We have already agreed, I think, that employers should be involved in apprenticeship frameworks and labour market assessments, even though it's not going to be written large on the face of the bill. And Amendment 58 ensures that this mindset doesn't stop at apprenticeships, but runs through how the Council exercises its functions more broadly. So I would say Amendment 58 is modest, it's reasonable, it's grounded in reality. It strengthens the bill without complicating it, and it helps ensure that the expanded powers of the Council are exercised with a clear, unimpeded line of sight to economic need and economic opportunity. And for those reasons, I will move these amendments in due course and ask colleagues to support, amendment, and ask colleagues to support it.
Sorry, I now call on Jackie Dunbar to wind up. Press the withdraw Amendment 51. Ms Dunbar.
Thank you, President Officer. I welcome the Minister's amendments, which takes us as far as we can go with our devolved powers in relation to fair work. I understand the points that Stephen Kerr is trying to make, but his amendment would actually narrow the functions of the SFC and would unhelpfully limit the purpose of post-school training and education. Ensuring it meets the needs of our economy is hugely important, but education cannot become that transactional. There is a strong need to support the wider societal benefits of post-16 training, education and skills development. I therefore cannot support Stephen Kerr's Amendment 58 and I move Amendment 51.
Thank you. The question is that Amendment 51 be agreed. Are we all agreed? Parliament is agreed. I call Amendments 52, 53, 54, 55, all in the name of the Minister, all previously debated with Amendment 51. I invite the Minister to move Amendments 52 to 55 on block. Minister.
Moved on block.
Does any member have an objection to a single question being put on Amendments 52 to 55? No members object. Therefore, the question is that Amendments 52 to 55 be agreed. Are we all agreed? Yes. Parliament is agreed. I call Amendment 56 in the name of Jackie Dunbar. Already debated with Amendment 51. Jackie Dunbar to move or not move?
Move.
Question is Amendment 56 be agreed to. Are we all agreed? Yes. That is agreed. Call Amendment 57 in the name of the Minister. Already debated with Amendment 51. Minister to move formally.
Moved.
The question is that Amendment 57 be agreed to. Are we all agreed? That is agreed. I call Amendment 58 in the name of Stephen Kerr. Already debated with Amendment 51. Stephen Kerr to move or not move?
Because it doesn't narrow anything moved.
Question is that Amendment 58 be agreed to. Are we all agreed? Parliament is not agreed. There will be a division and members should cast their votes now. And the vote is now closed. The result of the vote on Amendment 58 in the name of Stephen Kerr is yes 46, no 72. There were no abstentions. The amendment is therefore not agreed. Call Amendment 59 in the Minister, already debated with Amendment 51. Minister to move formally.
Moved.
The question is that Amendment 59 be agreed to. Are we all agreed? Yes. That Parliament is agreed. I call Amendment 60 in the name of the Minister, already debated with Amendment 51. Minister to move formally.
Moved.
The question is that Amendment 60 be agreed to. Are we all agreed? Yes. Parliament is agreed. I call Amendment 61 in the name of the Minister, already debated with Amendment 12. Minister to move formally.
Moved.
The question is that Amendment 61 be agreed to. Are we all agreed? Yes. Parliament is agreed. It takes us to Group 13, Membership of the Council. Call Amendments 94 in the name of Willie Rennie. Group with Amendments 94A, 95, 96, 63, 64 and 97. I point out that Amendments 95 and 96 are direct alternatives. That is, they can both be moved and decided on. The text of whichever is the last agreed to is what will appear in the bill. Willie Rennie to move Amendments 94 and 94A and speak to all amendments in the group. Mr Rennie.
I move Amendment 94 and 94A. This group of amendments are about the membership of the Scottish Funding Council, and it's to directly address the concerns that exist, and there are quite widespread concerns in the business community and amongst employers with the abolition of SAB and also the change from SDS that many employers had a good working relationship with. And so therefore I'm seeking to bring forward amendments that seek to put in place 2 or 3 members of the Council who are employers, who have experience in the space of apprenticeships. Yes, we'll take an intervention.
Daniel Johnson.
I'm very grateful to the member for giving way, and I recognise that this is a step forward in terms of ensuring that there is an employer voice. But as he also recognised, he noted the function that SDS played, which across a wider board was able to reflect a broader range of industry concerns and then come up with solutions, in that we're essentially reducing that to 2 or 3 members who will be just 2 or 3 members of a much wider. And there is a risk here that we lose that direct employer and industry voice in terms of shaping how apprenticeships and skills are delivered and indeed conceived.
Willie Rennie.
I mean, we'll address some of this in the final debate because that affects the whole of the bill and the purpose and value of that, whether it's value for money, whether it's delivering the desired effect from the Withers Review. But I think this is, as the member has said, this is a step in the right direction. I hope the government are able to accept my amendment to at least bring 2 members of the Council on as employers, so that we have that strong voice guaranteed within the Funding Council to make sure we can address some of those concerns. Amendment 97 gives regard the Minister has got regard to ensure that a suitable person to chair the Apprenticeship Committee is appointed to the Funding Council, someone with knowledge, expertise in business, but also has the experience of employing apprentices. They will be appointed to the Funding Council with a view to them potentially being the chair of the Apprenticeship Committee. And this is connected, 97 is connected to Amendment 109, which is in the next grouping, which is related to the employment and the appointment of the chair of the Apprenticeship Committee. Yes, certainly.
Ross Greer.
I'm grateful to the member for taking the intervention, and I have sympathies with the broad intention of what he's trying to do, and indeed the Greens will certainly support Amendment 94 to make sure there's that voice for employers. What I'm struggling with on 97, and excuse me, where I would appreciate the member just clarifying exactly what his intention is it reads to me that the chair would have to be somebody who had come from a business background, which would preclude, for example, an experienced former college principal perhaps chairing the committee. Is the member's intention that the chair has to be somebody who comes from a business background? Because I certainly think there's value in having those from that background. Indeed, it's essential to have them on the committee. It feels to me needlessly restrictive to say that the chair must come from one particular background when there would be other individuals who would have a lot to contribute in that role.
The amendment is slightly looser than that because it's to give regard to. But I would say, at least in the first instance, I think it should be an employer. It should be somebody from business. It should be somebody who's taken on a lot of apprentices. In order to make sure, if nothing else, to give confidence to the business community who are doubting whether there is any real value in doing this bill, that they are convinced that the new Funding Council, the new arrangement, actually understands employers and their needs and business, to make sure that apprentices don't get lost in the Funding Council apparatus, because we know the Funding Council haven't had their troubles to seek in recent years. So we need to make sure that we've got apprenticeships, a central part of what the Funding Council does, to make sure that we've got confidence in the wider community, so that apprenticeships do have an important place in the education and training landscape in Scotland. So it's a bit looser than that, but I would say in the first instance it certainly should be somebody from that background in order to build that confidence. I think this does feed into the wider concern, because we do need to have, I think, a Funding Council that is seen to be part of the business community, but the very name in itself kind of doesn't really reflect the apprenticeship role that it is about to take on, and I hope that the Funding Council do reflect that in order to make sure that it's communicated to the hundreds, the thousands of employers across the country, that this is their body that's going to be dealing with their apprentices in order to make sure their training needs are met for the future. And with that, I'll move the Amendment 94-94A.
Thank you, Mr Rennie. I now call on the Minister to speak to Amendment 62 and the other amendments in the group, Minister.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. And this is a really important group, and I'm grateful to colleagues who've brought amendments in this group. My amendments 62 and 63, firstly, directly respond to amendments brought by Pam Duncan Glancy, Daniel Johnson and Ross Greer and Miles Briggs at stage 2 concerning who should be appointed to the SFC. I acknowledge the intention behind those amendments at stage 2, and that it was helpful to have pointers as to what the ministers, or we as ministers, should consider when appointing members of the SFC. However, I said then that it would not normally be helpful for legislation to bind ministers' decisions in this regard. That being said, I have carefully considered this matter since stage 2 and have arrived at what I think and hope is a balanced list of persons ministers shall consider and should consider. This list includes persons who are representative of learners, employees of the SFC and employees of any bodies or persons receiving payments from the SFC. I want to emphasise that these amendments have been framed as have regard to the desirability of. This does not mean that ministers are required to appoint individuals who meet those specific criteria. Rather, they are to take those criteria into account and alongside the full skills matrix of the members of the SFC. All members of the SFC will collectively make decisions, with each member contributing their own skills and experience. We must not lose sight of the need to ensure that the SFC has sufficient expertise in key areas to meet its government governance requirements. Of course, those might well be met by candidates who also represent the key interests listed in Amendments 62 and 63. Willie Rennie's Amendment 97 complements my amendments in this group in that it makes provision about the consideration of skills, knowledge and experience of individuals that are appropriate for the chair of the Apprenticeship Committee. This amendment sits well with Willie Rennie's Amendment 109 in the next group, which requires the Scottish Ministers to provide the SFC guidance about the appointment of the chair of the Apprenticeship Committee. The 2005 Act requires the SFC to include at least 11 members and up to 14 members, as well as a chair and a chief executive. Willie Rennie's Amendments 95 and 96 seek to increase the maximum number of members that ministers appoint to the SFC to 15 or 16. They do not require that number of members, but allow for a larger governing body. Given that the SFC will be taking on significant new responsibilities for apprenticeships and work-based learning, I support increasing this maximum number to 16 and will therefore support Amendment 96. Willie Rennie's Amendment 94 is notably a departure from the approach normally taken in the 2005 Act and the bill, as Amendment 94 would mean that ministers must ensure that there are at least 2 members. And I think it's of the SFC who appear to represent the interests of employers. And I think it's important to consider that it will be at least 2 members, because it could well end up being the case that there are many other members on the board who have experience of business as well. And I just think that's an important point to recognise. I absolutely see why Willie Rennie has brought this amendment forward. And I know that some employers are concerned about the SFC taking on these responsibilities and what it will mean for apprenticeships. I have engaged with a number of these employers and their bodies and the business community more generally since stage 1, and I want to do all that I can to give employers and businesses confidence in the new arrangements. Amendment 96 creates the possibility for additional capacity by allowing for a further 2 members of the SFC. In that context, I am content to support Amendment 94 with Amendment 96. Amendment 94A would increase this employer representation from 2 to 3, which I think is probably going too far, given there might only be 11 other members on the SFC. So, in summary, I ask that Willie Rennie does not press his Amendment 94A and 95, and if he does, I would encourage members to vote against them. However, I am very supportive of Willie Rennie's Amendments 94, 96 and 97 and urge Parliament to vote for them. And I also urge Parliament to vote for my Amendments 62 and 63. Thank you.
Thank you, Minister. And I call Willie Rennie to wind up and to press or withdraw Amendment 94A.
Nothing more to add, but I'm not going to move 94A.
The member seeks to withdraw Amendment 94A. Does any member object? No member objects. Amendment 94A is therefore withdrawn. I call on Willie Rennie to press or withdraw Amendment 94.
Yes, moved.
Mr Rennie is pressing Amendment 94. The question is therefore that Amendment 94 be agreed to. Are we all agreed? Yes. Are we all agreed? Yes. Parliament is agreed. I call Amendment 95 in the name of Willie Rennie, already debated with Amendment 94. I remind members that Amendments 95 and 96 are direct alternatives, the text of whichever is the last agreed to is what will appear in the bill. Willie Rennie to move or not move?
95 not moved.
Not moved. I call Amendment 96 in the name of Willie Rennie, already debated with Amendment 94. Willie Rennie to move or not move?
Moved.
Moved. The question is that Amendment 96 be agreed to. Are we all agreed? The Parliament is agreed and Amendment 96 is therefore agreed to. I call Amendment 62 in the name of the Minister, already debated with Amendment 94. Minister to move formally.
Moved.
Thank you. The question is that Amendment 62 be agreed to. Are we all agreed? Parliament is agreed and Amendment 62 is therefore agreed to. I will call Amendment 63 in the name of the Minister, already debated with Amendment 94. Minister to move formally.
Moved.
Thank you. The question is that Amendment 63 be agreed to. Are we all agreed? The Parliament is agreed and Amendment 63 is therefore agreed to. I call Amendment 97 in the name of Willie Rennie, already debated with Amendment 94. Willie Rennie to move or not move?
Moved.
Moved. The question is that Amendment 97 be agreed to. Are we all agreed? Yes. Parliament is not agreed. There will be a division and members should cast their vote now. The vote is now closed. I call Claire Baker for a point of order.
Thank you, President Officer. I didn't connect. I would have voted yes.
Thank you, Ms Baker. Your vote will be recorded. I call Davy Russell for a point of order.
Sorry, President Officer. I couldn't connect here either. I would have voted yes.
Thank you, Mr Russell. Your vote will be recorded. The result of the vote on amendment number 97 in the name of Willie Rennie is yes, 108, no 8. There were no abstentions. The amendment is therefore agreed. We now turn to Group 14, Apprenticeship and Skills Committees and Boards. I call Amendment 98 in the name of Willie Rennie, grouped with amendments as shown in the groupings, and I call on Willie Rennie to move Amendment 98 and to speak to all amendments in the group. Mr Rennie.
So these amendments are all designed to strengthen the authority of the Apprenticeship Committee. You'll recall in the previous contribution that there are many businesses, employers who are concerned about the abolition of SAB. This is effectively bringing additional powers to the Apprenticeship Committee to almost replicate the powers of the advisory body that many employers and businesses respect so deeply. So just running through quickly a number of them, which I hope the Government is able to support on some, although I know they're not going to support others. 99 aims to direct rather than just advise the Council. This would give real authority to the Apprenticeship Committee to make sure that they were setting policy rather than being subservient to the Funding Council. Number 100 brings work-based learning into the remit of the Apprenticeship Committee. So this would make sure that, for instance, the whole area of foundation apprenticeships was brought into the consideration of the committee. 102 requires that more than half the committee are employers of apprentices or are in that space. 103 makes sure that the chair has the experience of employing apprentices. 104, which I hope the Government is able to support, make sure that the Funding Council has to have regard to the representative on the Apprenticeship Committee to make sure that they have understanding in this space of apprenticeships. And then 106, and this is important with regard to University Scotland's concerns. The graduate apprenticeships often don't get the focus, the attention, the time that perhaps modern apprenticeships have had under the current arrangement. And they are concerned to make sure that the system is smooth and fast and runs so that the new frameworks we were discussing earlier on are generated very swiftly rather than the slow and bureaucratic process that we had previously. And then 109 is about requiring the Minister to issue guidance with regard to the appointment of the chair of the Apprenticeship Committee. So those are the amendments. I hope the Parliament is able to support them, and I look forward to the discussion.
Thank you, Mr Rennie. I now call Ross Greer to speak to Amendment 64 and other amendments in the group. Mr Greer.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Amendments 64 and 65 in my name just make a technical but an important adjustment to the trade union representation on the Apprenticeship Committee. So the effect of this change in the wording is just to ensure that the SFC has regard to the desirability of appointing a person who is representative of all trade unions for apprentices, rather than representing one particular trade union. It wouldn't be practical, obviously, for every trade union to be represented in person at that committee, given the cap on the overall size of the committee, but it is important to make sure that there is a trade unionist voice there. So these amendments simply clarify that.
Thank you, Mr Greer. I call on the Minister to speak to Amendment 66 and other amendments in the group. Minister.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. And please, members, colleagues, forgive me. I've got quite a bit to say on these. Firstly, I will speak to my amendments 66, 67 and 68. Amendment 66 is the technical amendment which ensures that references to apprentices are consistent in the Bill and the 2005 Act. Moving on, Amendments 67 and 68 respond to amendments lodged at Stage 2, which sought to influence the constitution and role of the Apprenticeship Committee. These amendments make clear that the SFC must consult with representatives of apprentices and their employers and such other persons as the SFC considers appropriate when appointing members to the committee. It is absolutely right that appointments to this committee are informed by the views of the two paramount stakeholders, apprentices and their employers, and such other relevant parties as the SFC determines in the circumstances. I hope colleagues will support these amendments. Then there is the question as to whom should be appointed to the Apprenticeship Committee. The Bill doesn't mandate a particular composition for the Apprenticeship Committee, but the SFC is required to have regard to the desirability of including particular persons. At Stage 2, a number of members wanted a clear focus on businesses, industry and employers. Pam Duncan-Glancy also highlighted the importance of apprentices themselves. I could not support these Stage 2 amendments because they would have unduly constrained the SFC in making appointments to the Apprenticeship Committee. We need the membership of the committee to be able to flex and evolve to align with the apprenticeship programme, and we do not know how priorities might change in the future. Prescribing membership in this bill would mean that it could not change to meet the emerging needs and interests. However, I absolutely understand the desire to ensure that membership of the Apprenticeship Committee reflects broadly those specific interests in its work, as was discussed at Stage 2, as I've just set out. I'm therefore pleased to support Willie Rennie's Amendment 104, which requires the SFC to consider appointing apprentices or their representatives to sit on the Apprenticeship Committee. It also makes provision for consideration of business representatives, including small and rural businesses with an interest in apprenticeships. And I believe that's important. This amendment responds proportionately to members' concerns at Stage 2. The Apprenticeship Committee should take account of these diverse needs of apprentices and businesses across the whole of Scotland and support small businesses, which are, of course, really crucial to our economy right now and our future economic prosperity. Moving on, Willie Rennie's Amendment 109 requires the Scottish Ministers to give the SFC guidance on the appointment of the Chair of the Apprenticeship Committee. Given the essential importance of this appointment, as emphasised by members at Stage 2, I am pleased to support this Amendment 109. As Ministers are responsible for appointing members of the Council, and the Chair must be a Council member, it makes sense for Ministers to give guidance to the SFC on this appointment with regard to Amendment 109. This amendment also works well with Willie Rennie's Amendment 97, which was agreed in Group 13. I'm also pleased to support Ross Greer's Amendment 64 and Amendments 64 and 65, which improve the considerations around trade union representation on the Apprenticeship Committee and make clear that the SFC needs to consider appropriate trade union representation. Turning now to the remit of the committee, I'm grateful to Willie Rennie for bringing forward Amendment 100. As he has said, work-based learning in the bill makes provision for what are currently foundation apprenticeships. As he explained, it makes sense for the Apprenticeship Committee to consider both apprenticeships and work-based learning in the round. It will help to ensure that there are no disconnects between these different pathways and elevates the status of work-based learning, and I am pleased to support Amendment 100. Unfortunately, I cannot support the remaining amendments in Group 14, and I will now set out why. Willie Rennie's Amendment 99 would make the committee responsible for directing the SFC on matters relating to apprenticeships. This is not appropriate, as the SFC must retain overall statutory responsibility for exercising its functions, including those in respect of apprenticeships. Willie Rennie's Amendments 98 and 101 add to the remit of the Apprenticeship Committee, with the effect that it would be responsible for determining the requirements of a Scottish apprenticeship in respect of different occupations or activities. This is similarly problematic. The SFC as a whole is responsible for the apprenticeship functions. The SFC needs to be able to comply with its duties and legislation, including the mandatory requirements to have regard to certain views and to follow any regulations on procedure. The Apprenticeship Committee has a crucial advisory role, but it should not directly determine these matters. Moving on, Amendment 102 in the name of Willie Rennie adds a requirement that more than one half of the members of the Apprenticeship Committee must have experience of employing apprentices and have a background in industry. This would fetter the discretion of the SFC in appointing the committee and ministers in issuing their guidance. The Apprenticeship Committee will be responsible for advising on modern and graduate apprenticeships, and if Amendment 100 were to be agreed to this evening, also workplace learning. The SFC must be able to appoint the right mix of skills and experience to the committee to reflect these different responsibilities. Mr Rennie may be right that over half the members of the committee should have this experience and background, particularly in the early days of the Apprenticeship Committee's inception. But he may not, or it might not be appropriate for the committee to have this balance of membership in perpetuity. Therefore, prescribing the balance in law would restrict the evolution of these new arrangements and of the Apprenticeship Committee. Willie Rennie's Amendment 103 requires the person appointed to chair the Apprenticeship Committee to have experience of employing apprentices and have a background in industry. However, Amendment 97, considered in Group 13, and Amendment 109, between them, address these same concerns. Amendment 97 required the Scottish ministers to have regard to the desirability of appointing persons to the Council with those skills, and Amendment 109 requires the Scottish ministers to give the SFC guidance on whom to appoint to be chair of the Apprenticeship Committee. Therefore, Amendment 103 is unnecessary, and I would ask Mr Rennie not to press it for the reasons I've set out. Stephen Kerr's Amendment 69 is familiar from Stage 2. It requires the Apprenticeship Committee to have at least 20 members, which is unhelpfully limiting and prescriptive in my view, particularly when we have no experience of the Apprenticeship Committee operating yet. There is a balance to be struck in the size of the Apprenticeship Committee, or any committee for that matter. Too few members and it does not have the sufficient range of desirable views, skills and experience. Too many members and it is costly and hard to manage, even with regard to simple things like finding mutually convenient dates for meetings. So we need to be cognizant of all of this. Moving on to subcommittees of the Apprenticeship Committee, a number of amendments seek to create statutory subcommittees of the Apprenticeship Committee. This may be desirable, but it would be unhelpful for similar reasons to those already set out. To prescribe such an approach in law and to remove discretion from the SFC and indeed the Apprenticeship Committee itself, I do not think is desirable. This applies to Daniel Johnston's Amendment 105 and the consequential amendments of 107 and 110. And it also applies to Willie Rennie's Amendments 106, 108 and 111. Amendments 106, 108 and 111 require the SFC to establish a subcommittee of the Apprenticeship Committee with responsibility for considering issues related to graduate apprenticeships. Willie Rennie is right to highlight some issues with graduate apprenticeship delivery, issues which we are already working to fix before the bill comes into force and which the bill will further assist with. We certainly need the process of developing graduate apprenticeship frameworks to be more efficient, and frameworks absolutely need to be shorter and simpler, as I've said already today. The bill gives any person the power to request a framework to be prepared, and ministers can set out in regulations the process to be followed by the SFC in response. We could use those regulations to set out the process of timescales in developing and producing frameworks in the future, as I've already stated. Separating out graduate apprenticeships from other apprenticeships and work-based learning would potentially be counterintuitive to the shared aim of simplifying structures and making things more cohesive around all types of apprenticeships. Moreover, there will be nothing stopping the SFC nor the Apprenticeship Committee from establishing subcommittees in the future with an appropriate remit, should they deem it to be necessary, including to undertake specific work around graduate apprenticeships. So we don't need to put it on the face of the bill for a subcommittee on graduate apprenticeships. The SFC at their discretion and the Apprenticeship Committee at their discretion could create one in the future if they wish to. So therefore I ask members to support my amendments 66, 67 and 68 and Ross Greer's amendments 64 and 65 and Willie Rennie's amendments 100 and 104 and 109. I hope the arguments I have set out reassure and convince Willie Rennie not to move amendments 98, 99, 101, 102, 103, 106, 108, 109 and 111 in his name. And I similarly ask Daniel Johnson not to move his amendments 105 and 107 and 110, and Stephen Kerr not to move his amendments 69 and 112 in his name. If any of these amendments are moved, I ask members to vote against them. Thank you.
Thank you, Minister. I call on Stephen Kerr to speak to Amendment 69 and other amendments in the group. Mr Kerr.
I don't think the Minister gave a reason as to why he thought that regional skills committees were a bad idea. I didn't hear that in his response to the amendments. I don't think I missed that. I just don't think it was said. Now, in relation to my Amendment 69, yeah, I remember that we had the discussion about this previously, but the reason that I am keen that there should be some indication of the size of this committee and the composition of it, same reasons that Willie Rennie gave, actually, and that is that I have been around long enough to have seen this sort of thing before, where there is a well-intended committee set up, some kind of a structure. It's all with the best of intentions. But over time, what happens is that the employer or private sector involvement in the committee diminishes to the point it becomes dominated by one sort of member of the committee, namely a public sector representative or a trade union. I mean, the most startling example of that for me has been the experience of the city-region deals. And the committees that have been set up around those deals and the consequential changes that have taken place over time because of the nature of the committee work and because of the way the committees are run. Gradually people opt not to be part of it, and therefore putting these matters on the face of the bill, as was proposed by Willie Rennie and by me, makes, in my view, a lot of sense. And the reason that I wanted there to be a minimum number of 20, and I know that sounds like a lot for a committee, is you need to have a breadth of experience. You need to have you also need numbers. I mean, if there's only one or two, I mean, I heard the Minister say earlier in relation to the FCS in general, they're going to have 11 members, 2 will be employers. I think that's wholly, I mean, it seems totally underrepresentative of the real world and the real economy, because at the end of the day, this is all about education and training for a purpose, and that purpose has to do with making our country a more prosperous country. I think the Minister is making a mistake by dismissing the idea of setting the number and also the composition of the Apprenticeship Committee. Now, I do want to say something more about 112, which, as I say, I don't think I heard the Minister say anything about. And the reason for this is because of the nature of Scotland's economy, which is recognised, by the way, in basic things like the number of enterprise agencies we've got. We've got one for the Highlands and Islands, we've got one called Scottish Enterprise, we've got one in the south of Scotland. Why do we have 3? I mean, you could argue we should have more or less. But the reality is we do that because we acknowledge there is a difference in the nature of the economy in these different parts of Scotland. That Scotland is not homogenous in economic terms, in terms of the activity, the economic activity that's occurring in different parts of Scotland. So we can design national structures, national committees, national priorities, but the truth is that skills are delivered locally. Labour markets are local. Employers recruit locally. And the reason that I focused in Amendment 100 and what's the number again? 112 is because colleges are served real places with specific economic strengths and weaknesses. And if the system doesn't properly recognise that, I believe it will never quite line up with reality. And I think there's been a propensity over the last few years, particularly in the lifetime of this current government, for things to be centralised, to become national, rather than to focus on the regions. So 112 is about the role and importance of regional skills boards and making sure they are not treated as peripheral or decorative. These boards are where national ambition meets local economic reality. I give way to Ben Macpherson.
Minister.
I thank the member for taking this intervention, and I apologise that I didn't cover his Amendment 112 in my remarks. So if it's helpful, I appreciate that the member lodged a similar amendment in 194, in that case at stage 2. Unfortunately, this Amendment 112 at stage 3 runs counter to simplification and recent changes to remove regional strategic bodies that were considered unhelpfully bureaucratic in regional college provision, for example, in Glasgow and Lanarkshire. And the Amendment 112 is, with respect, also unclear on how these boards would interact with the apprenticeship and skills committees with whom they are more likely to come into conflict with their overlapping roles. And I would refer the member to Amendment 10 in my name that we debated in one of the first groups about the strategy and how it will consider regional needs and nuances, and I think that's the right place in order to consider these points, and also the amendments that Jackie Dunbar brought in the last group, which again consider local issues and matters.
Tim Kerr.
I think the problem I've got with all of that is the same issue that I picked up with the Minister, and I don't want to be picky about words, but words do matter. Words convey what we mean. I mean, he talked about efficiency and I talked about effectiveness, and those things don't necessarily add up. They're not the same thing. And similarly, when he uses the word simplification, I do kind of shudder at that word simplification, because what it suggests to me is one size fits all. And I think we've got enough of one size fits all mentality in respect to this government and the way that they approach Scotland. They don't seem to recognise the variances that exist, particularly when it comes to our economy. And what's going to be good in one part of Scotland is not going to necessarily be appropriate at all. It's not going to fit at all with another part of Scotland. And that is why I strongly believe that there is a place for regional skills boards. And I'm not equating that. I don't know why he said about Glasgow and Lanarkshire. These are not the same things that I'm talking about. I'm not talking about this in the context of college regionalisation or structures. I'm talking about this in the context of skills. So these are regional skills boards. And the reality is, if you draw everything ever more to the level of the national, then, whether we like it or not, that simplification, that efficiency that the government talk about becomes a one-size-fits-all approach to the issue. So I think too often regional skills intelligence has been gathered, maybe even discussed, but then quietly ignored at a national level when decisions are being taken centrally. And basically, members opposite, I know, take great hilarity in this, but I'm definitely committed to the concept of devolution. But the devolution I want isn't a devolution from London to Edinburgh. It's a devolution of powers from Edinburgh to the places that people live in Scotland, because they're all quite different, all quite diverse. And that's not recognised enough in the way that we do things here when we try to make a homogenous Scotland a reality, because it's not a reality. So 112 is designed to prevent all of this. It strengthens the expectation that the work of regional skills boards is not just noted, not even passingly discussed, but actively informs the advice given to the Council, given to the various functions of the Council. And it's not beyond the wit and wisdom of those involved to make sure that information is appropriately transmitted without that having to be on the face of the bill. And this matters, and I repeat this as I conclude, this matters because Scotland is not a single labour market. And what employers need in different parts of Scotland is quite diverse. Skill shortages are uneven. We know that. We know that in the public sector. We know that in education, for example. We know that in the other parts of our economy. Opportunities are also uneven across Scotland. If funding and provision don't reflect that, then I fear that we will waste money and frustrate employers and learners alike. So I would conclude by saying that both 69 and 112 together push back against a tendency to over-centralise, to over-institutionalise, and to allow the public sector in Scotland to dominate discussions. And in relation to skills, that's a particular priority and importance. This is about effectiveness. This is about respect. This is about the complexity of our country. This is about respect for place. Economic growth doesn't come from uniformity. It doesn't work that way. It comes from playing to strengths, supporting local industries, building skills pipelines locally, where local businesses will do their hiring. That makes sense from the perspective of the local economy. And if the bill's genuinely about building a skill system that supports productivity, opportunity and growth across all of Scotland, then regional skills boards must be taken seriously. And Amendment 112 helps ensure that they are. And for these reasons, I hope colleagues will be open-minded enough to support Amendments 69 and 112, but especially I draw the Chamber's attention to Amendment 112.
Thank you, Mr Kerr. I call Daniel Johnson to speak to Amendment 105 and other amendments in the group. Mr Johnson.
Thank you very much, Deputy Presiding Officer. And indeed, I think we all need to thank members for bearing with us all this evening. This penultimate section, but I actually think it is one of the most important. My critique of the government's approach on this has been consistent both with the current minister and his predecessors, and it is this, is that essentially there's a lack of clarity around the strategy, what it is seeking to deliver and critically how. And if that is the case, if you need that strategy, that clarity around what you seek to do, if you are going to get structural change right, what is equally important is if you're going to get your strategy right, you must embody that within the governance correctly. And I fear that we are not getting that right here. And for a number of different reasons. First of all, if we look at the track record of the Scottish Funding Council, it is not good in terms of employer engagement, in terms of being industry-led. If we look at the one area of the apprenticeship system, the skill system, that it does have input into, or locus over in terms of graduate apprenticeships, we have not seen an expansion of that. And yet what we are being asked to believe is that on the basis of there being 2 members, that we will have that industry insight and leadership in order to drive that. And I just worry that that will be insufficient. Because in my view, if I could just finish this point, in my view, in terms of what the strategy should be, must be, is that we must have a skills system that is industry-led. Now, we don't have an articulation, we don't know necessarily what the intention from the government is because we don't have that strategy. But if that is the intent, I do not see how 2 members of a board of 11 or 14 can deliver that. Happy to give way to the Minister on that point.
Minister.
Thank you. And of course, in previous discussions, I've argued that it should go up to 14. I think it's important to recognise, as I said in previous comments just a few moments ago, that while amendments, if agreed, will stipulate 2 members from industry, there's nothing to say that other members of the council won't have a business background. Indeed, if you look at the makeup of the board at the moment of the Scottish Funding Council, it includes business experience. So I just think this is a very important point to emphasise to those listening from the business community.
It is critically important, but I think we also need to look at what is being asked to do the council. In terms of, to put it in crude terms, we're all familiar with the phrase "follow the money." The reality is, in terms of the vast bulk of the funds that the Scottish Funding Council will be responsible for, the overwhelming majority will be around university and college funding. And so it's very naturally going to, I think, skew towards a focus in those areas, unless you put the structural devices in place to prevent that. Which is, and what I would acknowledge is my amendment does not quite do what I would have intended. What I would have wanted was to create an apprenticeship board, not just an apprenticeship committee, not just a body there for advice, but I think much as Willie Rennie seeks to do with some of his amendments, actually make it a structural input into the overall funding council. And I think if we did that, I think we'd have elevated it and created a mechanism where absolutely you could balance the wider responsibilities, but with a much greater, I think, emphasis on that industrial input to shape skills policy and direct it. Now, that's why I sought to create a new body that would have been called the Apprenticeship Board, to do just that. Unfortunately, the drafting is such that it is set up as a subcommittee of the Apprenticeship Committee, and that was not my intent, which I acknowledge. But I think the point is an important one. I think as long as this is simply a committee there to provide advice, I think we have an issue with the way that this will work and the natural tendency for these things to skew towards the centre of gravity over the overall organisation, especially since this is a pre-existing organisation. And I think the other point I would like to make is I think Stephen Kerr makes some good points around the regional policy, not just because I think actually having regional policies is important, and actually not just because actually that regional aspect of deployment was a critical element of Withers, and actually we don't really know what the government thinks about that, but it actually goes to the very heart of this. Is that I accept the point, the broad point from the government, that it is sensible that we have an ability to draw funding together for both tertiary education and the skills system. But actually there are different ways of doing it. One way might be to pursue a central approach, but another way might well have been to pursue a much more regional model, where actually budgeting is assigned directly to regional bodies that could disperse that funding at a regional level. But we haven't actually examined or answered that question, which is why that we have a fundamental flaw around that lack of strategy from the government. And the end of the day is this, as we can talk about strategies as though they are just papers, but I do not believe that they are. Actually, strategies are actually the embodiment of decision-making. We bake them into the structures that we create. And I think by simply creating a Scottish Funding Council with just 2 members that are from a business background, an industrial background, by having an apprenticeship committee that merely advises and does not have a clear structure around the content or shape, and whose composition itself is not clearly set out, I think we are setting out a very unclear strategy. And it certainly will not be industry-led in the way that I think many people who want to see a change in the way that skills are delivered in Scotland, one that's much more flexible, one much more responsive to changing economic need. And this is why I think there is a fundamental flaw at the heart of this bill, and why these amendments that the government is going to reject this afternoon, I think actually, particularly Willie Rennie's, which I think could actually make for a better bill, will be a mistake. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr Johnson. I call on Willie Rennie to wind up and to press or withdraw Amendment 98. Mr Rennie.
It's actually been quite an interesting debate, this last section. I think the debate about whether you have an integrated set of committees and bodies that consider everything in the round, so you get full integration, you're able to deal with big sectors like finance, which dominates many regions across the country, not just one region, that considers it in the round. Or a more bespoke approach where you try and deal with regions on an individual basis, you try and deal with graduate apprenticeships in a subcommittee for that, you try and have an industry committee, largely driven by fear that this will just simply be apprentices being tacked on to the Funding Council. And that's what I think is at the heart of an awful lot of this. Whenever you get change, everybody looks to protect what they have, rather than perhaps looking to see what the opportunities are for integration. And I fully accept that's a debate I think we've all been struggling with, and I've certainly been struggling with through the process and the progress of this bill and the Withers report. And I do accept that there are benefits from trying to change the way that the Funding Council operates as a whole, not just to deal with apprentices, but to actually consider what learning there is to be gained from apprentices for the college and the university sector, and vice versa. What can the apprenticeship system learn from the way that these institutions work, and the other way around as well? So I think all of that is a valid debate to be had. I do worry about being sometimes a bit too prescriptive in the way that we legislate here, when in fact what we should be allowing is some degree of flexibility as well as some prescription, but some degree of flexibility to allow the new body to evolve over time to meet the new needs of the economy and the skills landscape. So I am pleased that the Minister's accepting my amendments 109, 100 and 104 to deal with the appointment of the chair of the committee, the work-based learning to be part of the committee, so the foundation apprenticeships will be in the apprentice committee, and also 104 when it's having regard to who is a member of the apprentice committee in terms of business representation, but also representation from apprentices. So I think that's all fine. I hope the Minister has heard all the anxieties that exist in the room, in particular from my regard to the graduate apprenticeships, to make sure that the system is a damn sight swifter than we've got so far, that it is flexible and meets the modern needs in a very, very swift way, not overly bureaucratic like we have just now. That the committee composition reflects the need to have many employers, people who take on apprentices that have direct experience under the current system, but also the overall authority of the committee. And I accept the Apprentice Committee is a subcommittee of the Council, and that's probably the way that you have to have it in order for accountability purposes. But I hope that the Funding Council fully respects the authority of the committee and actually more often than not will just accept what it says. It doesn't have to rubber stamp it, but should almost accept everything that it says, because that's where the authority should be. And I hope they understand and engage and debate with them, but I hope that they understand that the committee should have that authority in order to gain the confidence of the business community, but also to make sure we get the policy right. So I hope the Minister listens to all of that. And for those reasons, I won't be pressing all the amendments that I've moved today, other than 109, 100 and 104, which I will move. And on that, I'll conclude.
Thank you, Mr Rennie. So I take it you will not be pressing Amendment 98?
Yeah, not moved.
Willie Rennie seeks to withdraw Amendment 98. Does any member object? No member objects. Amendment 98 is therefore withdrawn. I call Amendment 99 in the name of Willie Rennie, already debated with Amendment 98. Willie Rennie to move or not move?
Not moved.
Not moved. I call Amendment 100 in the name of Willie Rennie, already debated with Amendment 98. Willie Rennie to move or not move? Moved. The question is that Amendment 100 be agreed to. Are we all agreed? Yes. The Parliament is agreed. Amendment 100 is therefore agreed to. I call Amendment 101 in the name of Willie Rennie, already debated with Amendment 98. Willie Rennie to move or not move?
Not moved.
Not moved. I call Amendment 102 in the name of Willie Rennie, already debated with Amendment 98. Willie Rennie to move or not move?
Not moved.
Not moved. I call Amendment 103 in the name of Willie Rennie, already debated with Amendment 98. Willie Rennie to move or not move?
Not moved.
Not moved. I call Amendment 104 in the name of Willie Rennie, already debated with Amendment 98. Willie Rennie to move or not move?
Moved.
Moved. The question is that Amendment 104 in the name of Willie Rennie be agreed to. Are we all agreed? The Parliament is agreed. Amendment 104 is therefore agreed to. I call Amendment 64 in the name of Ross Greer, already debated with Amendment 98. Ross Greer to move or not move?
Move.
Moved. The question is that Amendment 64 be agreed to. Are we all agreed? Yes. The Parliament is agreed. Amendment 64 is therefore agreed to. I call Amendment 65 in the name of Ross Greer, already debated with Amendment 98. Ross Greer to move or not move?
Move.
Moved. The question is that Amendment 65 be agreed to. Are we all agreed? Yes. The Parliament is agreed. Amendment 65 is therefore agreed to. I call Amendment 66, 67 and 68, all in the name of the Minister and all previously debated with Amendment 98. I invite the Minister to move Amendment 66 to 68 en bloc.
Moved en bloc.
Thank you. Does any member object to a single question being put on Amendment 66 to 68? No member objects. The question, therefore, is that Amendments 66 to 68 are agreed to. Are we all agreed? Yes. Are we all agreed? Yes. Does somebody say that? The Parliament is agreed. And those amendments are therefore agreed to. I call Amendment 69 in the name of Stephen Kerr, already debated with Amendment 98. Stephen Kerr to move or not move?
Because 102 was not moved, I'm going to move 69.
69 is moved. The question is that Amendment 69 be agreed to. Are we all agreed? Yes. The Parliament is not agreed. There will be division and members should cast their vote now. The vote is now closed. Point of order, David Russell.
Sorry, Presiding Officer, I couldn't connect here. I'd have voted yes.
Thank you, Mr Russell. Your vote will be recorded. The result of the vote on amendment number 69 in the name of Stephen Kerr is yes 48, no 69. There were no abstentions. The amendment is therefore not agreed. I call amendment 105 in the name of Daniel Johnson, already debated with amendment 98. Daniel Johnson to move or not move?
Not moved.
Not moved. I call amendment 106 in the name of Willie Rennie, already debated with amendment 98. Willie Rennie to move or not move? Not moved. I call amendment 107 in the name of Daniel Johnson, already debated with amendment 98. Daniel Johnson to move or not move?
Not moved.
Not moved. I call amendment 108 in the name of Willie Rennie, already debated with amendment 98. Willie Rennie to move or not move?
Not moved.
Not moved. I call amendment 109 in the name of Willie Rennie, already debated with amendment 98. Willie Rennie to move or not move?
Moved.
Moved. The question is that amendment 109 be agreed to. Are we all agreed? Yes. The Parliament is agreed. Amendment 109 is therefore agreed to. I call amendment 110 in the name of Daniel Johnson, already debated with amendment 98. Daniel Johnson to move or not move?
Not moved.
Not moved. I call amendment 111 in the name of Willie Rennie, already debated with amendment 98. Willie Rennie to move or not move?
Not moved.
Not moved. And I call amendment 112 in the name of Stephen Kerr, already debated with amendment 98. Stephen Kerr to move or not move?
Moved.
Moved. The question is that amendment 112 be agreed to. Are we all agreed? No. The Parliament is not agreed. There will be a division and members should cast their vote now. The vote is now closed. The result of the vote on amendment number 112 in the name of Stephen Kerr is yes 31, no 70. There were 17 abstentions. The amendment is therefore not agreed. We now turn to Group 15. Which is on review of the Act and statement on financial implications. I call Amendment 71 in the name of the Minister Group with Amendments 72, 73 and 113. I call on the Minister to move Amendment 71 and to speak to all amendments of the Group. Minister.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. My amendments 71, 72 and 73, as in previous groups, tidy up opposition amendments accepted at stage 2. New Section 17A places a requirement on ministers to lay before the Parliament a statement on the financial implications of any transfer of functions arising from the Act. However, it would not be helpful for that duty to crystallise too early. If the new system is not sufficiently well advanced, such a statement might have little that is meaningful to report. Amendment 71 therefore amends the timing of the duty as soon as reasonably practical after royal assent to within a period of 1 year of the commencement of this section. Amendment 72 changes the requirement for the statement to be in respect of any transfer of functions, because the transfer from SDS to SFC is actually taking place administratively out with the bill. Amendment 72 replaces the current wording with wording that specifies the SFC assuming the new functions conferred by sections 3 to 5 of the bill, which concern funding for programmes of training for employment, Scottish apprenticeships and work-based learning. Amendment 73 moves Section 17A to after Section 5, which seems a more logical place in terms of the order of provision in the bill order, reflecting its clarified scope if Amendment 72 is accepted. I'm very pleased to support Willie Rennie's Amendment 113, which we worked on together. Post-legislative scrutiny is appropriate in principle, and this amendment takes a reasonable and pragmatic approach to that task. Two words that describe Willie Rennie very well too, if I may say so. Reasonable and pragmatic. So thanks for that through the process. Amendment 113 would require 2 reviews and reports. The first would place 1 year after the first would take place 1 year after commencement of this section and 1 after 5 years. That seems sensible, Presiding Officer. Without claiming to own a crystal ball, we think that means that the first review could look at how a transition to the new system has worked, and the second review would then consider how the structural changes put in place by the bill are making a difference in the sector in practice. So I ask members to support all the amendments in this group, and I move Amendment 71 in my name.
Thank you, Minister. I call on Willie Rennie to speak to Amendment 113 and other amendments in the group. Mr Rennie.
The Minister has made me blush, not because of what he said, because I have sunk even lower than Stephen Kerr in this debate. Amendment 113 is about post-legislative scrutiny, and it is to make sure that this bill, this Act, if it goes through, is actually reviewed after 1 year or as soon as reasonable after that period, and after 5 years as well. And this is really important in the context of this bill because of the deep-seated concerns that we've already rehearsed this evening amongst the business community and amongst employers about the value of making this change. So therefore, it is my hope and my desire that this amendment enables the post-legislative scrutiny that should be available for all pieces of legislation, but it should not be tokenistic. It should be a meaningful review to make sure that we have got this right, and that we are able to make sure that the apprenticeship landscape is fully and properly integrated in with the rest of education and training in Scotland, the one-stop shop that the Minister seeks. So I hope that this amendment actually does result in a meaningful review after 1 and 5 years, and results in that proper review of what we are debating this evening.
Thank you, Mr Rennie, and I call on the Minister to wind up.
Nothing further, Presiding Officer.
Thank you, Minister. The question is that Amendment 71 be agreed to. Are we all agreed? The Parliament has agreed. Amendment 71 is therefore agreed to. The question is that Amendment 72 be agreed to. Are we all agreed? The Parliament has agreed. Amendment 72 is therefore agreed to. I call Amendment 73 in the name of the Minister. Ready to debate with Amendment 71. Minister to move formally. Thank you. The question is that Amendment 73 be agreed to. Are we all agreed? Parliament has agreed. Amendment 73 is therefore agreed to. I call Amendment 6 in the name of Jeremy Balfour. Ready to debate with Amendment 1. Jeremy Balfour to move or not move?
Not moved.
Not moved. I call Amendment 7 in the name of Jeremy Balfour. Ready to debate with Amendment 1. Jeremy Balfour to move or not move?
Not moved.
Not moved. I call Amendment 8 in the name of Jeremy Balfour. Already debated with Amendment 1. Jeremy Balfour to move or not move?
Not moved.
I call Amendment 9. Not moved. I call Amendment 9 in the name of Jeremy Balfour. Ready to debate with Amendment 1. Jeremy Balfour to move or not move?
Not moved.
Not moved. I call Amendment 113 in the name of Willie Rennie. Already debated with Amendment 71. Willie Rennie to move or not move?
Moved.
Moved. The question is that Amendment 113 be agreed to. Are we all agreed? The Parliament has agreed. Amendment 113 is therefore agreed to. I call Amendment 74 in the name of the Minister. Already debated with Amendment 10. Minister to move formally.
Moved.
Thank you. The question is that Amendment 74 be agreed to. Are we all agreed? Are we all agreed? We are all agreed. The Parliament has agreed, and therefore Amendment 74 is agreed to. That ends consideration of amendments. I will now move directly to the determination, as members will be aware. He's looking very good. As members will be aware, the presiding officer is required, under standing orders, to decide whether or not, in her view, any provision of a bill relates to a protected subject matter, that is, whether it modifies the electoral system and franchise for Scottish parliamentary elections. In the case of this bill, in the view of the presiding officer, no provision of the Tertiary Education and Training, Funding and Governance Scotland Bill relates to a protected subject matter. Therefore, the bill does not require a supermajority to be passed at stage 3. I'm not sure why there's this talking, not looking at anybody in particular, Mr Stewart. We will now move on to the next item of business, which is a debate on motion 20484 in the name of Minister Ben Macpherson on the Tertiary Education and Training Funding and Governance Scotland Bill at Stage 3. I would invite those members who would wish to speak in the debate to please press the request to speak buttons, and I call on Minister Ben Macpherson to speak to and to move the motion. Up to 7 minutes, please. Could I ask those members who are leaving the chamber to please do so quickly and quietly? And we will have a short suspension before we move to the next item of business. Thank you. Thank you. So the next item of business is the debate on motion 20484 in the name of Ben Macpherson on the Tertiary Education, Training, Funding and Governance Scotland Bill at Stage 3. And I call on Minister Ben Macpherson to speak to and to move the motion. Up to 7 minutes, please.
Thank you, Presiding Officer, and I'm pleased to open this debate on Stage 3. And I want to start by thanking my predecessor, Graham Day, for the remarkable amount of work he did in putting in the necessary effort to develop the bill and to take it through most of Stage 1. I also want to thank the committee and all stakeholders who have given their views, time and expertise to shape and refine the bill, and I hope many of them will see now that they have positively influenced the bill's provisions and that it is now a better bill because of them. I also want to thank colleagues, MSPs from across the chamber for their thoughtful and robust contributions, not only today but throughout the process of this bill. And I'm very grateful to colleagues for their willingness to engage over recent months. All of these discussions and the amendments that we've agreed together have strengthened the bill. Furthermore, I want to thank everyone at Skills Development Scotland, the Scottish Funding Council and Student Awards Agency Scotland, and the unions representing the staff there. I know for staff at Skills Development Scotland and their board this is an unsettling time, but please know how much your work is valued and that your contributions will continue to be impactful and appreciated as the implementation of this bill takes place and once that implementation is complete. And all the staff moving from Skills Development Scotland to the Scottish Funding Council will continue to make a significant difference for learners and for employers. Briefly, yes.
Dr. Johnson.
It's good to hear his thanks for Skills Development Scotland, but would he acknowledge that the Scottish Government left people working for Skills Development Scotland essentially in limbo for 2 years while the Scottish Government decided what it was going to do with the Withers report? And that is an entirely unsatisfactory set of circumstances, and one that I would hope the Scottish Government would never repeat, leaving people, an agency and jobs in limbo in that manner.
Minister.
Appreciate the member raising the points. I mean, that's not my understanding, but I, of course, wasn't the minister during that period. But what I would say is that there has been significant engagement with the Scottish Government, with Skills Development Scotland and the Scottish Funding Council on engagement with staff, and this will continue at pace through implementation, because all staff involved, their professionalism and their commitment have helped to build the system we have today, and they will all be central to delivering the change we need in the years ahead. And in terms of stakeholders, I also want to take a moment to commend Fiona Jurett for seeing the opportunity presented by this bill to further her campaign with the Emily test to ensure that no family has to experience the loss of a child attending college or university as a result of gender-based violence. Fiona challenged us all to do more on this vital issue, and I thank her and Pam Gosal MSP who supported her for doing so. And the amendment that we passed at stage 3 and worked on together goes as far as we can to prevent such violence in the future, and I hope it achieves its purpose. Presiding Officer, stage 3 is of course the point at which Parliament must decide whether this bill provides the right framework for the reform that so many agreed is needed. I know views differ on whether the focus of the bill should have been to strengthen our education and skills system in the way it's currently constructed, or undertake structural reform. And I have thought about this very carefully since taking up post. And the firm conclusion that I've reached, and is the position of the government strongly, is that we can do both and that we must do both. I accept that not every member will agree with every provision in the bill. However, I hope we can all recognise the care with which it has been developed, the evidence on which it is based, and the genuine efforts made to listen and respond to concerns during the whole process. Yes?
Dr. Johnson.
I'm grateful to the Minister for giving way. He said he's thought about this bill a lot. Can I ask him just to put on the record, at any point since he became Minister, did he give any consideration to dropping this bill at this stage and coming back, potentially if he's still in post or his party are still in government, with a new bill in a new Parliament? Because that's what a number of people were calling for. There was an opportunity to press the pause button and look at this afresh in a new Parliament.
Minister.
I was educated in our system here in Scotland to believe in the importance of critical thinking, and it will be crucial in the period ahead, and I apply that to all my decisions, and as a Minister and as an MSP. And yes, of course, it was prudent for me to consider this bill with a fresh perspective, and through the engagement that I had and the reassurance that I was given, I am of the firm view that this is a piece of legislation that's necessary, because we must get ready for what is coming, and we must continue to progress, and we must build on the expert evidence that is presented to us, like the Withers review did. Because this bill offers a sound and balanced foundation for a simpler, more joined-up tertiary education and training system, one that can continue to evolve in partnership with this Parliament, the education sector, the business community and the people we serve, and of course the staff working to support learners and innovation every day. Briefly, yes.
Michael Chapman.
I thank the Minister for taking my intervention. I think one of perhaps the missed opportunities with this bill was the opportunity to fully implement the Von Presidency recommendations from 2012, which some of us attempted to do at stage 2, but the Minister was of the view that that would challenge the ONS classification too much. Can the Minister outline how he will continue to keep an eye on the concerns expressed then by members and by others about that, the accountability, the scrutiny required of governance of both FE and HE to ensure that our institutions actually are governed effectively, as Von Prunchinsky recommended?
Minister.
I thank the member for her intervention and her engagement on these matters, not just at stage 2, but more generally. Of course, the Government has considered what more it can do through the process of the bill, but also with mindfulness towards ONS classification, and there's a constant balance that we have to strike in that regard. So I would refer to the measures that we've taken on governance, and I think they're appropriate at this point. But I'd be happy to engage further as we proceed. As has been articulated by myself and the previous minister, this bill is about making the system simpler and more efficient, and also to provide a better experience for learners, whether they're retraining or undertaking the beginning of their pathway, and through that reducing poverty and growing the economy. We have undertaken a number of measures within the bill which are important in terms of our apprenticeship system, for example, putting it on a statutory footing to advanced parity of esteem. And out with the bill, we have also developed work to continue the development of graduate apprenticeships, which has been mentioned through the Stage 3 proceedings, and also a shift to a more expansive approach to work-based learning will allow us to enhance all relevant opportunities from school through to university. There is also significant progress that we've made with regard to fair work, particularly working with the Scottish Green Party. I'm grateful to Ross Greer for all the engagement that we've had on those points. And I refer to the changes that we've been made in that space. And we have also, of course, considered importantly, and I just want to finish on this, Presiding Officer, the need for all the staff involved in this process should Parliament pass this bill. I met with trade union body representatives last week to hear their concerns, and we will have regular dialogue into the next stage, and expect public bodies to do the same. And I want to give my reassurance that services for learners and employers will be maintained throughout the transition period, and that there will be no erosion of support as changes are implemented, because at its heart, this bill, this journey to transform Scotland's education and skills landscape is not simply about processes or structures, it's about people and the people we serve, because the technological change that is coming will be profound, and we need to get our systems organised to meet the rapidly approaching challenges of the next quarter of the 21st century. This bill is an important step on that journey, and I move the motion in my name that Parliament supports it.
Thank you. And I now call on Miles Briggs.
Presiding Officer, and can I start by thanking the many organisations and businesses who've provided really helpful briefings ahead of this Stage 3 debate, but also for their work ahead of Stage 2 as well, because there has been concern out there of what this bill potentially can have impacting on their businesses. And that has been quite clear, speaking to them, that assurances have not been forthcoming. But I do welcome the constructive way the Minister has engaged since his appointment and inheriting this bill from Graham Day, and the amendments which were accepted by Government at Stage 2, and a number of amendments which I did raise at Stage 2, which have been taken forward by Ministers at Stage 3. As I stated during the Stage 1 debate, when Scottish ministers introduced the bill, we on the Conservative benches were open to the reasons and rationale behind it. But as we've looked at this bill, it's become clear that it is not going to deliver what ministers suggest. And it's worth reflecting on why Scottish Government have decided to legislate in this area. The independent review of the skills delivery landscape by James Withers in 2023 highlighted the need to focus on a new vision that meets challenges and future needs, principally looking towards the flexibility to be delivered across post-school learning systems in order to achieve genuine agility and ensure that learners of all stages of their lives, and that's something I think this debate's demonstrated, a lack of looking at that lifelong learning aspect, but all people across Scotland have that opportunity at all stages of their lives to get into skills and potential apprenticeship opportunities. And so I am sorry to say that reality is this bill does not reflect real delivery of the Withers report. And from the outset, we have challenged ministers to go further and for this bill to genuinely be more radical. As Russell Finlay outlined 2 weeks ago, Scottish Conservatives want to see economic growth at the heart of every single Scottish Government decision, with a government which is always on the side of the entrepreneur and the innovator, and ambitious and aspirational for small businesses across our country. These are the businesses who make our country tick, and for our apprenticeship system, therefore, to be more responsive and agile. That's what we've been working to try to achieve. And Scottish Conservatives want to see an apprenticeship system that works with businesses to deliver more apprenticeship places, and crucially in those sectors where we are hearing week in, week out there are huge skill shortages, that we address that, not simply discuss it. That's why we wanted to see this bill go further to empower the sectors to create more opportunities, and a demand-led approach to help provide training and retraining opportunities within Scottish firms, and for them to be at the heart of shaping the skills development and the courses which will be crucial in a host of sectors if we are to realise the potential of many growth areas in our economy. And Scottish Conservatives wanted this bill to be more than simply changing how apprenticeships are administered in Scotland, and hope this would be an opportunity to seriously address the growing skill shortages and skill gaps which exist across so many of our key sectors, which are vital to the future of our economy and the prosperity of this country. Now, turning to the concerns which were raised during the scrutiny at the Education and Young People's Committee, I continue, and we on these benches continue, to have serious concerns at the potential transfer costs. And although I note the Minister's letter to the Education and Young People's Committee estimates costs still look between the next 6 years to range from £2.1 million to £28.1 million, and the Minister has suggested a central estimate of £15.1 million. I think that remains a significant concern. I want to see every Scottish apprenticeship pound going to the delivery of more apprenticeship places and opportunities, not simply expensive structural changes. And I'm also disappointed that the Government haven't accepted the need for more and better transparency around the apprenticeship levy during this debate as well. We on these benches also agree with the Association of Directors of Education in Scotland, who we've been working with, who state that the bill has a lack of systemic, evidence-based approach, insufficient engagement with key partners, especially local authorities and employers, that there's financial risks to successful existing programmes, like foundation apprenticeships, and the potential to negatively impact on young people, particularly the most disadvantaged and those furthest away from the education system. Their involvement and concerns being expressed have not been taken forward, and I hope ministers genuinely will not just see this as the end point. There needs to be work to protect apprenticeship places, especially as been raised during this debate around foundation apprenticeships. To conclude, Presiding Officer, Scottish Conservatives did hope this bill could be a genuine opportunity for a culture shift across our education and skills system and the current working relationships within our college sectors as part of a wider tertiary sector to be more collaborative, so colleges could be empowered to become drivers of change rather than merely receiving funding, and empowering our college sector to deliver on the opportunities in their local areas needs to be reconsidered as well going forward. Audit Scotland have said that the college sector has seen a 17% reduction in real terms funding in the last 3 years alone. That's resulted in colleges now having to deliver significant annual savings, fewer students and fewer lecturers as well. So Scottish Conservatives will work to make sure that the next Government and Parliament genuinely develops a skills bill. We would propose bold and practical measures to invest in our colleges, fix Scotland's broken apprenticeship system, address skill shortages and allow local employers to shape the training that matches their workforce needs, as others in different parts of the UK can. Sadly, this bill has been a missed opportunity to genuinely look towards the Government and Parliament to take forward a more significant piece to deliver for our skills sector. That's why Scottish Conservatives will not be able to support the bill at decision time this evening. Thank you.
Thank you. I now call on Daniel Johnson.
Thank you,
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Look, I'd like to begin by reiterating my thanks to the Minister for the way that he has approached this bill. I think it has been very useful, there's been clear engagement, and I can see some of the differences in the bill that we have in front of us this evening as compared to the one that he was first examining. Likewise, I don't think that this bill is without merit. I think there is a strong degree of sense of actually bringing together funding streams so that those things can be used more flexibly. But we cannot support the bill such as it is, because fundamentally, and the advantage of a Stage 3 debate after a long Stage 3 process is that none of the arguments will necessarily be entirely new, but I think the fundamental point I've been making through this afternoon is that structural reform embarked upon without clarity of what is sought to be achieved, without strategy, at the very least, I think has risks, and at worst, I think can be damaging. But put it another way round. The Minister in his opening remarks said that hopefully that these reforms will bring about the change in the skills system that we all want to see. We don't know what those are. We don't know what success looks like. We don't know what the skills system, the apprenticeship system, will look like, feel like, what difference that will make as a result of these reforms. So therefore, we do not know whether or not this bill will have succeeded, because we don't have that clarity from the government. And therefore, how do we know that these structures are right? How do we know that this form of organisation will be the one that will enable to deliver it? But let's be clear that we need change, and there are a number of changes that a number of trade bodies and individual businesses set out that could be made now, and we do need urgent change. But that's the last thing this government's doing, because it's 10 years since the Enterprise and Skill Review, which started much of this off. It's been 3 years since with the Withers Review, and it's going to take another 3 years for this bill to be fully enacted. It is all taking far too long, and actually I think the government do well to listen to those voices who have got clear views about actually how flexibility, upskilling, reskilling can be implemented now. And these are the urgent priorities that are in front of us, because we know we need clarity around skills funding, but that is static, despite money being received through the skills levy. And this bill will do nothing around that transparency for either employers or for sectors, looking at actually how those funds are being delivered. But what's more, we have had cuts to the few measures, such as the Workforce Development Fund, that did provide the sort of flexibility beyond the apprenticeship system that was so valued by business. And furthermore, that we have seen a gutting of the ability for colleges to undertake anything that looks like flexibility, cut back to the provision that they have to under the college credit system, which is far too inflexible and doesn't really enable colleges to deliver the flexibility they need. Now, and it's not just that the government has been slow, it's not just that they have been clear. One of my fundamental issues is this government has an extremely poor track record of delivering structural reform, particularly in the absence of any clear strategy. And we only have to look at this sector alone. I think much of the problems that we have is because of a poorly executed reform of our colleges. Again, through a lack of clarity, there's an insistence on full-time courses rather than part-time courses, when actually, when you look at the economic needs that we have in front of us, it is the flexibility that part-time courses deliver that is the very sort of training and skills provision that actually many employers are crying out for. Furthermore, this bill doesn't even touch on many of the elements that Withers did set out. I mean, I thought the discussion about regional structures was really important. That was a central recommendation from Withers. But there's nothing about how we deliver regional approaches, despite the fact that clearly that is an approach which will deliver flexibility. Nor is there any sense in how we have either micro-credentials or skills part supporting, again, the features of a flexible system that we want. But above all else, I think the biggest fear is a lack of clear industry voice. I think it's hard to conclude anything other than industry voice will be diluted by the measures we see. Simply 2 seats on a Scottish Funding Council, within a body that has a much broader remit than simply skills, I think it is difficult to see how industry will be able to shape and lead and take forward the skills agenda within a body such as this. Now, I believe I am out of time, but I think this is a missed opportunity. I'm not to say that there won't be benefits of this, but because of that missed opportunity, the lack of clarity, the Scottish Labour Party cannot support the bill this evening. Thank you.
Thank you. I now call on Ross Greer.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. The Greens will be supporting the bill this evening for the reasons that I outlined in part of my Stage 1 contribution. Though at that point I did express some scepticism that I'd like to get on to. I want to start this evening, though, by thanking the Minister and his bill team for their engagement throughout the process, and Graham Day, his predecessor, for his extensive engagement before he handed over this portfolio. As I said, the Greens agree with the core premise for this bill. My starting assumption here was that I couldn't ignore, and I don't think we as a Parliament could ignore, the Audit Scotland and Withers reports when it came to the Scottish Funding Council and Skills Development Scotland, and crucially that need for greater alignment within the system. And having more of the system under one roof should result in greater alignment. And I think ministerial direction is the other key part here, though, and it is where I have a lot of sympathy with what Daniel Johnson said, and indeed I think we were agreeing on much of this in the Stage 1 debate, that what has been missing consistently in this system is clear ministerial direction, clear strategy. We've had a purpose and principles document from the government that failed to really set out a clear strategy across the sectors. We had a national strategy for economic transformation that was not strategic or transformative. We have a national performance framework that simply isn't used. It has sat gathering dust on the shelf from the moment it was published. That's where the need for alignment is at its greatest, at a ministerial level. And I want to quote directly again from... Yes?
Ross McCall.
Yeah, you may have moved on, so my apologies. But if we don't have a clear strategy, how do we know that the outcomes will be met?
Ross Greer.
I'm grateful for the intervention. I think in part it will be far easier, ministers would have far greater ability to direct that strategy when we have more of these objectives, more of these purposes all sitting under one roof. Now, I do think there is a need for that greater ministerial direction. Some of the amendments we've made to the bill, though, should also aid in that greater strategic alignment. I want to quote from the James Withers report, though. So in paragraph 417 of his report, he said, there must be a clear articulation of the areas that are a national priority. This goes beyond signalling economic transformation or net zero into a specific articulation aligned to strategic policy intentions of the sectors and occupations that will be critical to their delivery and their workforce needs. So, in essence, fewer buzzwords, more clear strategic direction. And the climate, that net zero point he makes, is an obvious example to me. We need far more people who are trained to install and maintain heat pumps. We need to transition the existing workforce to deal with gas boilers, and we need to increase that workforce. But I saw during my party's time in government how hard it was to get the system to line up behind that objective. But we're also trying to legislate here for cultural change, because part of the difficulty in getting the whole sector to line up behind that objective is the difference in culture between the organisations. And again, I think that's part of the value of having more of this sitting under one roof. And that was what was quite clear in the Audit Scotland report in particular. The difference in culture of the two organisations was a significant barrier to achieving the kind of alignment that Withers and Audit Scotland asked for, and that I believe this Parliament would expect. That's one of the reasons why we support this. Bringing more of it under one roof should reduce the risk of the kind of culture clash that we saw between the two organisations. Now, we wrestled with similar challenges when it came to education, the Education Bill and the need to replace the SQA. That was about legislating to change culture. That is not an easy thing to do. But I think in a number of the amendments that we've made to the bill, particularly when it comes to the membership of the Council, the membership of the Apprenticeship Committee, it's not perfect. There was a range of views here we needed to compromise. But I think we have established the underpinning structure that should allow for the kind of cohesive culture that will, in turn, create the alignment that we are all expecting out of this system. Thank you.
Thank you. And I now call on Willie Rennie.
The context of this is that Audit Scotland report from quite some years ago now, where it was scathing in its criticism of all involved in this sector, the inability of SDS and the Funding Council to come together to agree a strategy, the failure of ministers to direct that change and to make sure there was an integrated approach between those two bodies and more. So that's the foundation of this. And the Withers report did clearly set out that it wanted a single source of funding, but it did also recommend many other things that I think have been completely lost in this debate. Talk about careers, something the Minister's predecessor was passionate about. He wanted to create that career service that he believed would drive change throughout the whole system, because if we can get young people at school making the right decisions about their future, dealing with this parity of esteem by proper advice at the right time for those young people, could transform the skills landscape altogether. But that's been completely lost from the political debate. At least it might be happening somewhere else, but I'm not aware of it. And of course, that parity of esteem that we have been banging on about for years, but we failed to deliver. So, and also then skills planning, which Stephen Kerr was telling us at length about today. I think that is also a critical part of what Withers was recommending. But we're not really debating those issues, and that's one of my regrets about Big Bang reorganisation. Big Bang reorganisation often introduces paralysis, uncertainty, fear of change. It means that staff are looking about, considering their jobs, they're looking over their shoulder, rather than driving forward change for the future. But that all has happened as a result of the Big Bang reorganisation. It rarely delivers the returns that you want, and especially when we're talking about tens of millions of pounds that's in this reform. So are we getting the return that we really want from this change? Now, I've always also believed that there are many bodies within the public sector. We cannot bring them all under the one roof. You need to have separate management. So to think that we can only get integration and joint partnership and systems thinking by bringing them all under the one roof, we're kidding ourselves. We need to get leaders to drive the change across the boundaries to make sure that everybody under their umbrella is working together and with all the other public sector bodies. Now, my other concern about, I'm listing a long list of reasons why the bill is terrible, but let me just set out the Funding Council capacity. We know that the Funding Council has been under the cosh, that they've had to deal with all the crises in the higher education sector, but also in colleges. Did they have the headspace to be able to deal with this additional responsibility? So you can get from what I'm saying is I wouldn't have started from here. I wouldn't have gone down this route. But we are where we are. We are where we are. And I do know that if we go back from this and we say no to this bill, I think that might even cause more chaos in the sector. And I'm afraid to say that what would it mean for SDS? Would it mean another set of reforms are coming forward which might threaten them in the future, or are they secure forever? What does it mean for the leadership of that organisation? And so on. Yes, we'll take an intervention.
Douglas Ross.
I'm grateful to Willie Rennie for giving way. It's my understanding that SDS wrote to the Minister just last month with alternative views and opinions on how there could be reform, but not in the costly and disruptive way that the Scottish Government are bringing forward. Is it not right that these views should be considered in this debate and hopefully going forward?
Willie Rennie.
I think the member's probably right. I fear that it's just too late in the debate, that we are so far down the track now. I hope there is pragmatic partnership between SDS and a sense of change in that organisation, that they are working pragmatically to try and make this transition as smooth as possible. I have been impressed, I have to say, by the personnel that have been appointed to this reform within the Funding Council itself. I think some of the individuals are really quite talented and I think can make the best of this. I think, as I say, going back, I think we may create even more uncertainty. So for all those reasons and the amendments that I've secured today, which will give a bigger voice to employers and to business, that we will therefore reluctantly vote for the bill today. I do want to, just in the last couple of seconds, I want to thank the clerks and and the officials. The officials have been outstanding and given good, sound advice. Also the SFC and the SDS, particularly the staff that have been through hell in the last few years, the Chamber of Commerce and the formidable Liz Cameron, who you never cross too readily, and of course University of Scotland and a myriad of other organisations who have been excellent in providing advice. I just hope this works. It better work, because we need to get this skills landscape right. We need to train people with the right skills for the economy. If we don't do that, the repercussions will be even greater.
Thank you. And we move to the open debate. I call Jackie Dunbar to be followed by Douglas Ross.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. And as was the case at stage 1 debate, I'd like to thank the committee clerks, the witnesses, the ministers, both former and present, and officials. Also my fellow committee members for their work in scrutinising this bill. As you can imagine, as we move from general principles to the nitty-gritty, there was more work to be done. So I'd like just to add a little more thanks to reflect that. I am disappointed, however, but not surprised that some are not supporting the bill tonight. Not surprised, because I think I've been in the committee 2 years, and I don't think Labour have supported a stage 1 general principles report yet. Doesn't matter what the subject is, they amend it a great deal, but then don't support it. But I will repeat what I said at the start of my last speech on this. So often in the Chamber we talk about Scotland's future and building a better country for the next generation. This bill is not just about building a future for the next generation, but ensuring that they have the skills and knowledge to build their own future. Of course, this bill is not only about young folk. There are plenty of people who enter or re-enter tertiary education and training later in life for all sorts of reasons. Goodness knows there are plenty in the Aberdeen area who have had to reskill and retrain in recent years. First because of the downturn caused by oil prices being too low, then because of the downturn caused by windfall tax because oil prices were briefly too high. Thankfully, the Scottish Government have stepped up to support training and retraining in our city, not least through their Oil and Gas Transition Training Fund and through helping to fund Nescall's Energy Skills Hub. That means that whether the workers in my Aberdeen Donside constituency are in oil and gas or renewables, they will continue to have the skills needed to power our nation and power our economy. But let's get back to the bill in front of us. This bill will ensure funding goes where it matters most, to supporting skills, to driving innovation, to ensuring our economy has the talented workforce it needs, and to giving every learner the opportunity to thrive. Our colleges, universities and other training providers are tasked with equipping people, whether it be young people leaving school or those looking to retrain and take a new path, with the skills and qualifications that they can use to find their way in life, whether they use that to find a good quality, well-paid job, or whether they use those skills to establish their own business, or even in a voluntary role. However, folk want to contribute to our economy and to our society. This bill will help them get the skills they need. Presiding Officer, college, university, apprenticeships and other training all help folk to improve their skill set. Therefore, it seems appropriate that I should talk about how this bill has itself improved since it was first introduced. So let me list some of the amendments that have been included in this bill. It allows for a review of the credit-based funding model for colleges. There will now be a requirement for governing body members and senior officers at institutions to declare conflicts of interest. There is more being done to ensure further and higher education institutions operate with transparency and accountability as a condition of funding. More is being done to protect whistleblowers and to see better engagement with trade unions and with students. New powers will be introduced for the SFC to limit fees for apprenticeships managing agents. Now let's get on with it. Let's get this bill passed. Let's modernise how money gets to colleges, universities and training providers. Let's ensure folk can get the skills and training they need, and let's support our learners to better themselves so they can go to build a better Scotland. Thank you.
Thank you. I call Douglas Ross.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. And far be it from me to use my limited time to stand up and defend the Labour Party, but I have to take exception to what Jackie Dunbar said. She commented that in her 2 years in the Education Committee, she can't remember the Labour Party supporting a bill at stage 1. They did. They supported Daniel Johnson's most recent bill, a member's bill, but they also supported, and Pam Duncan-Glancy is coming in as the member at the time, they supported the Education Scotland bill, which was a government bill, but said it needed to be heavily amended. Interestingly, though, the SNP members on this committee, as with every other member of the committee, couldn't support the general principles of this bill in our committee report because we had serious concerns. The committee took a very unusual step of not recommending to Parliament whether we should or should not support the general principles of this bill, and I think it is important we get that on the record. I'll give way to Pam Duncan-Glancy.
Pam Duncan-Glancy.
Thank you, Presiding Officer, and I thank the member for taking the intervention. I had tried and hoped to get my mouse quick enough to intervene on the earlier contribution from Jackie Dunbar and to ask her to reflect on her comments about the Labour Party and indeed my membership and time on that committee and how we supported the general principles of the bills as Douglas Ross has set out. I also think it's important for Parliament to reflect that the committee stages are an important part of the scrutiny of legislation and that all members reserve the right to continue throughout the parliamentary process to look to seek amendments and consider how they vote at the end of the day on a bill after their full process has gone through. Thank you, Presiding Officer.
Douglas Ross.
I'm grateful to Pam Duncan-Glancy for that intervention and I agree with the points she's making. And just to stick with this issue for a little while longer, I would actually say to Jackie Dunbar she should be less concerned about the motives or the background of those of us opposing the bill tonight. She should be more concerned about those who are supporting the bill tonight. And I say this with all due respect, but the Liberal Democrats are supporting this bill after their spokesperson said he's given a long list of reasons the bill is terrible. The Liberal Democrats are reluctantly supporting this bill tonight and they are hoping it works. The government have been able to cobble together enough MSPs to back this bill, but it is not a ringing endorsement of what is contained within what should be a very important piece of legislation, and I do think the government should reflect on that. There are many reasons that I have and remain really unconvinced with this bill, and I think the Minister would have been well served to withdraw it. I'm not sure anyone who's standing for election, I'm not standing for election in a few months' time, will knock on a door and find someone grabbing them, embracing them with a hug to say thank you for getting this tertiary education bill through Parliament. Thank you for costing the taxpayer £15.1 million, although it could be as high as £28 million on this change. Because if they do, we should have got them into committee. Because we didn't get any enthusiasm at committee for this bill. Again, I'll quote Willie Rennie. I think at one point he said that the reaction was, "Meh." It was a shrug of the shoulders. We were really struggling to get people to say, in the limited parliamentary time you have available as elected members, go for this. This is the priority you should be taking forward in the Education Committee. Again, I think we've missed an opportunity here to get this bill correct and actually get something more important on the statute book. I'll give way to Daniel Johnson briefly.
Daniel Johnson. I mean, further to the lack of people giving evidence encouraging the Education Committee, the Economy Committee heard from a number of industry bodies who said that actually this would be a distraction from changes that could be undertaken now and with urgency. Wondered if you think that the Economy Committee's evidence should also be reflected upon.
Douglas Ross.
I think it should, and the committee tried to put that in our report as well. A couple of issues, because I know my time is almost up. I mean, I have serious concerns about the capacity of the SFC. There may be very good people involved at the SFC, but their eye has been off the ball in a number of big issues that we would have expected, I think, as a Parliament, for them to have been more over the issues. And on ONS classification, I've been through stage 1 of this bill, stage 2 of this bill, stage 3 amendments and now the stage 3 debate. And I still don't know where this tipping point is going to be if there are more changes in legislation in the future where our ONS classification is going to be in danger. The Minister has been unable to answer that repeatedly through this process, and here we are potentially voting for a bill tonight and we still don't know. So, in conclusion, Presiding Officer, I can't support this bill tonight. I think we have had an opportunity in Parliament to do this a lot better. That has not been taken by the Government. But it will pass tonight because the Greens and the Liberal Democrats will support the SNP. And as we seem to do in this place, we will then get a round of applause from the government benches. And I just ask them to question tonight, what are they clapping for? Because I'm not sure what they think this bill is supposed to deliver will deliver. And I think in years to come, we'll think this has been a missed opportunity and we could have done far better. Thank you, Presiding Officer.
Thank you. We move to winding up speeches. There's a little time in hand, and I call Ross Greer.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. In my opening speech, Ros McCall intervened on me with, I think, what was a very fair challenge. If there is not clear strategic direction, how are we going to achieve alignment? Now, having sat here for 6.5 hours at that point, I couldn't find the word I was looking for in my brain. The word was function. I think if we gather all the relevant functions under the one roof, it makes it far easier to achieve that alignment. That does still require clear strategic direction, though. We can legislate for structure. It's much harder to legislate for strategy. And indeed, in many ways, Parliament shouldn't legislate for strategy. It's for voters at each election to decide what government they elect and for the government to set its strategy, not for us to legislate to bind future governments. But we can legislate to set some direction on that. I'll take an amendment in just a second. I would point to one of the amendments I passed at stage 2 of the bill, which does require the SFC to give due regard to the government's economic, social and environmental objectives. I think that was about as far as we could go in legislating on strategy, but what we can do through legislation is certainly resolve structural issues. I'll happily take the intervention, though.
Very grateful to Ross Greer for giving way. I mean, I accept his point to a degree about function, but actually if we even look in terms of the SFC's ability to combine functions, and we look at the experience of the university sector and the college sector, which was the raison d'etre of the SFC being created in the first place, I don't really think that we have the parity of team between those two sectors when we have the college sector very much as the sort of the poorer cousin of their higher education peers.
Ross Greer.
I think, to some extent, Daniel Johnson makes a fair point. I don't think that's all on the SFC. I think that a lot of that ultimately comes down to decisions made by government and parliaments over a number of not just years but decades. So it's not just on the SFC. But this bill has also been a way in which we have been able to strengthen the governance structures of the SFC. There is one other area that I want to touch on, though, before closing. So I did say at stage 1 that the Greens supported the bill in part because we agree with the core premise, but also the opportunity to use this bill to address other issues, and I think we have been successful in some of those regards. Much of our debates in stage 2 in the groupings was dominated by questions of fair work and standards for apprentices and for staff of the education institutions. We've talked before about examples of the fact that 9 out of the previous 10 years saw industrial action in our college sector, or that many graduate teaching assistants in our universities are effectively working for less than the minimum wage because of how poor their salary is and how many hours they are in practice expected to work above what they're contracted to. We do all, I think, want to address these issues, but we wrestled over the extent to which we can apply funding conditions in legislation without straying into areas that are clearly reserved, like employment law. So it wasn't just about whether we can act, it was about whether we can act in and via legislation. My starting point there was the fact that in 2021 we did apply conditions to Scottish Government grants and contracts in relation to payment of at least the real living wage. The government quite fairly put it back to me, though, that was not set out in legislation. It was achieved through a change of policy. So I'm glad that on that point, as the Minister said, we came to an agreement that was announced last week to expand that approach in further and higher education. So there are 2 fair work criteria that are currently conditions of funding, that is the real living wage and also appropriate worker voice, i.e. trade union recognition. But the other 5 will now also be requirements. So that's investing in workforce development. No inappropriate use of 0 hours contracts. I would suggest all 0 hours contracts are inappropriate, but there you are. Action to tackle the gender pay gap and create a more diverse and inclusive workforce. Offering flexible and family-friendly working practices for all workers from day 1 of employment and opposing the use of fire and rehire practices. Those are significant improvements. The fact that those will now be conditions of funding. And I want to credit Unite, the GMB, Unison and especially EIS FILA, who've campaigned on this issue for a very, very long time. In particular, the EIS FILA members at Forth Valley College, who led the national campaign as a result of what happened at their institution, led the national campaign against fire and rehire in the college sector and won a really important victory that in many ways paved the way for this. I do think, as Maggie Chapman said, that the bill was somewhat of a missed opportunity for us to address wider issues of the governance of individual institutions, colleges and universities. We are more than a decade on from the 2015 Act, and I think there is a need for us to look again at governance in the sector. But as I said a moment ago, we can legislate to address structural issues. Audit Scotland and the Withers report both clearly laid out structural issues in the system. I think by aligning the system better, we will address some of those issues. We have legislated through this bill. Once we pass it, we will have legislated to somewhat address the issues around strategy and direction. But again, it's not appropriate to do all that through legislation. So much as the Greens are comfortable to vote for this bill today, it is a challenge on not this government, it's really a challenge on the government that will be elected after May, to set out a very clear strategic direction for our colleges and universities in particular, to set out that clear strategic direction. What are we trying to achieve? Not just our economic needs, but social and environmental needs as well, because it's only with that clear direction that colleges in particular can thrive and succeed in the way that they have clearly given us ample evidence they are capable of doing.
Thank you, and I call on Paul O'Kane, a very generous 4 minutes.
Thank you very much, Presiding Officer. At this stage in the evening, and perhaps given many of the contributions we've heard already, it may not be beyond that generous 4 minutes. But I do think it's important to pull together some of the threads which we have heard and our reasoning on this side of the chamber for not supporting the bill this evening. I think Daniel Johnson outlined quite clearly the number of significant concerns we have remaining around the bill and what the bill crucially won't do in terms of the wider landscape around skills in Scotland. I would echo what colleagues have said, though, about the Minister's efforts, and I appreciate, like me, he has come into the bill process as it has advanced, and that is not always easy, but I think he has tried to engage, and I do recognise in a lot of what he said that he recognises the future challenges that will exist for a future government. But I think that kind of is the core of much of our concerns this evening, because the Minister spoke about technological change, about facing that future challenge. Of course, I think the reality is a lot of that challenge is here and now and is present, and those jobs of the future and those industries of the future are moving at pace, not just in Scotland but internationally as well. And I think we see that particularly in terms of the growth of AI, of digital tech, of the defence sector, of medicines, etc. And I think that's why we have something of a missed opportunity in this bill to actually make the demonstrable change we need in terms of training and upskilling, in particular young people, for those jobs that are already here and where other countries are perhaps moving ahead. And I think a lot of the context to that was set out by speakers this evening, Willie Rennie, Ross Greer, Daniel Johnson and Miles Briggs, around how did we get here and all the work that's been going on ever since perhaps that Audit Scotland report that Willie Rennie referenced, Withers obviously, and the kind of stark challenges that were outlined by that review. And I just don't think that this bill is meeting many of the issues that were at the heart of that more widely. I thought Douglas Ross's contribution was interesting when he posed, what do the public think and what will be the judgment of much of this in terms of the election we're about to enter into. I think, yes, if you knock someone's door, they're probably not enthused by a technical bill like this, but I think where their concerns actually would lie is the level of apprenticeship starts, the opportunities that exist for people in their communities. And I made this point in debate of amendments. We know that learning providers requested 34,000 starts in 2024-25 compared to the actual starts of 25,000. This bill tonight will not add a single apprenticeship. That's the reality of where we are. Yes, I'll take Willie Rennie.
Willie Rennie.
I did actually have somebody raise it on the doorstep. It was an employee of SDS. And they didn't quite grab me with joy. It was probably the opposite. And I think what it does remind us that the decisions that we make in this place have direct consequences of the employment prospects of individuals. And therefore we need to act with care every time we're talking about big bang reorganisation. We may think it's a good political thing to do, but we do need to fully understand the consequences it have on people's livelihoods, as that person made clear to me.
Paul O'Kane.
Well, I'm firstly shocked that anyone in North East Fife would not greet Willie Rennie at the door with an embrace of joy. But in saying that, I think he makes a fair point around the decisions we make having an impact. And we've heard it from the trade unions as well at SDS. We've heard it from those who work in those agencies and the concern that and the disruption that perhaps causes, and ensuring that we take cognizance of that. So I think it's well on the record this evening. As I say, I'm conscious about the bill not making the change we want to see right now, about pushing perhaps some of this down the road, because we know that it should be rooted in the Withers Review, and I agreed with the central conclusion of the Withers Review around that structural and operational reform that we've heard so much about throughout today's process, and the creation, obviously, of the single funding body. But it does fall short in terms of skills reform. It risks becoming that cosmetic big bang reorganisation that Will Rennie spoke about, rearranging structures without addressing underlying failures that are letting people down and holding the economy back. And I think fundamentally, as we've heard from across the chamber, the bill will pass this evening, but perhaps without the degree of enthusiasm, the degree of vision moving forward. And as I said in my contributions on amendments, the belief on this side of the chamber is that we can only see change and move things forward in this area with a change of government that will come in the debates that we have in the election, which I think the people of Scotland are ready for. Thank you.
Thank you. And I call on Ros McCall, a very generous 5 minutes.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Scotland needs a skills system that values apprenticeships and technical education just as highly as academic routes. That shouldn't be controversial, and this is the goal that the Scottish Conservatives have long supported. And this bill was an opportunity to deliver that change. Unfortunately, even as amended, it still falls short. It doesn't provide the clarity, funding confidence or delivery plans that learners, employers and providers were promised, and for that reason will not be supporting it here at Stage 3, which has already been mentioned. And we have to start with the context, because under the SNP, college capacity has collapsed. Full-time equivalent places have fallen by more than 8,000 to just over 116,000, and that's the lowest level on record. Student headcount is down, enrolments are down, and institutions are increasingly fragile. College Scotland has been clear that a number of institutions are already in a precarious position, and the Scottish Funding Council's capacity to support them is under serious strain before any major organisational change even begins. And at the same time, apprenticeship demands continues to far outstrip supply. Employers are crying out for skills. We know that demand is closer to 40,000 apprenticeship places a year, yet only around 25,000 are being delivered. Young people are competing with 60 to 80 applicants for every place. And that's not a system that's working. And yet, despite that pressure, the SNP has presided over a situation where £171 million raised from employers through the apprenticeship levy has not been spent on apprenticeships. Scottish businesses have paid £875 million into the levy since 2020, but only £704 million has been spent on graduate foundation and modern apprenticeships. That is money that should have gone directly to training opportunities. Against that backdrop, the bill proposes a major structural reorganisation, transferring responsibility for apprenticeships and national training programmes from Skills Development Scotland to the Scottish Funding Council, significantly expanding the SFC's remit, staffing and responsibilities. And we agreed with the principle of simplifying the landscape. The Withers Review set out a compelling case for reducing fragmentation and bureaucracy. But structures alone does not deliver outcomes, and reforms without clarity creates risk. Even at Stage 3, there remains uncertainty around cost, staffing transfers and pension liabilities. Ministers have revised estimates, but they're still estimates. Parliament is being asked to approve a substantial change without full confidence in the long-term financial impact. There's also a genuine concern about delivery. Stakeholders have warned that the proposals could become more complex, more costly and slower to implement than envisaged. And Unison has raised concerns about risk to apprenticeship quality and volume and to staff. Education leaders have warned that the foundation apprenticeships could be weakened or unintentionally sidelined. And those are not abstract concerns. They go to the heart of how young people access skills and qualifications. Some improvements have been made at Stage 2, and we welcome greater transparency and governance provisions. However, those changes don't resolve the core problem. This bill does still not guarantee that money will reach the front line, that apprenticeship numbers will increase, or that technical education will finally be given the parity of esteem it deserves. And on to a couple of points that have been made tonight. Daniel Johnson had highlighted that reform without clarity and strategy, as I've mentioned in my speech so far, is flawed. And if we don't know if the structure is right, how can it be delivered? And that was the point that I then went on to speak to Ross Weir on an intervention. And to Mr Greer, I would sort of highlight, and I'm glad he came back on his closing remarks, but the function doesn't need everything to be under one roof for it to be aligned. It can be done, as was mentioned by Willie Rennie, by strong leadership, and that could be done with different processes and by different bodies. And I also want to highlight to the Liberal Democrats and Willie Rennie, I'm a little disappointed that you're in a situation where you're supporting the bill. Because a bad bill and bad legislation is not a reason to vote for the bill. And whilst I totally understand the point he made where knocking on doors, you meet people where decisions in this place do have an impact, it also does a disservice to the people that we're put here, the general people we're put here to serve. And to put through bad law does them a disservice. And the last point I want to just highlight is the one mentioned by Douglas Ross, which the committee could neither support or oppose this at Stage 1. And I think that's very important because right from the outset, the committee looking at this at Stage 1 couldn't find agreement on that stage. So, Presiding Officer, the Scottish Conservatives will continue to champion a skills system that's demand-led, employer-informed and genuinely focused on opportunity. But we cannot support legislation that risks adding complexity at a time when institutions are fragile and learners are already being let down. So I quote the words of Milton Friedman: "One of the greatest mistakes is to judge policies and programmes by their intentions rather than their results." And this applies to politicians and governments too. Reform should be about outcomes, not upheaval. It should mean more apprenticeships, more training for people, young and old alike, to succeed, stronger colleges, clearer pathways and better value for money. And this bill does not deliver. Thank you.
Thank you. And I call on the Minister to wind up the debate. A very generous 6 minutes, Minister.
Thank you, Presiding Officer, and to fellow members for all their contributions, and particularly to Ross Greer and Willie Rennie, the Scottish Green Party and the Scottish Liberal Democrats, for engaging extremely constructively in this process and for helping to take this important legislation forward. I also want to record strongly my thanks to my team of officials who have worked incredibly hard and proactively and thoughtfully. Together, with care, we have progressed this bill, knowing the responsibility that nurturing our people, our most important aspect of our society, our most important resource, is an extremely important responsibility. Presiding Officer, while we've been considering Stage 3 tonight, there will be, or will have been, hopefully they'll be in their beds now, children wondering what they're going to do when they grow up. We must help inspire them. There will be teenagers deciding what choices to make at school and on the next step of their pathway, and we must help guide them. There will be those who are part of Generation Z who will be wondering how they will navigate the challenges ahead in an increasingly unsettling world. We must seek to reassure them. And there will be older folks. Some may be anxious, some may be excited about the possibilities to retrain and upskill, and we must seek to support them. And part of all of that, part of that responsibility, as we serve in this place, serve all of those people, is to continuously make sure our systems are adapted and ready for our people and for the future. Because as Audrey Cumberford of Edinburgh College in my constituency has stated, the future world of work and skills will be volatile, uncertain, complex and ambiguous. So we need to adapt. We need a system that's agile. and one that enables even more of our people to make the most of their natural talents. A system that meets our collaborative and collective needs and fosters diversity, creativity and collaboration. One that is cohesive and enables us to remain globally competitive. The bill will deliver a sound and balanced foundation for a simpler, more joined-up tertiary education and training system once implemented. One that can continue to evolve in partnership with this Parliament, the sector, the education sector, the business community, many of whom support this bill. And I think it's important to emphasise that. Federation of Small Businesses and the Scottish Federation of Food and Drink, for example, this week emphasised their support. And most importantly, this bill will continue to involve with the people we serve. And of course, the staff working to support learners, and innovation every day. And that's why I'm pleased that we also have Colleges Scotland, University Scotland and the Scottish Training Federation supporting this bill, as well as I said, many significant employers, large and small. Yes.
Douglas Ross.
I'm grateful to the Minister for giving way. He's just mentioned University Scotland. One of their key issues throughout the process with this bill has been ONS classification. At this late stage, after 9 o'clock on Tuesday, when we're debating stage 3, does he yet know what the tipping point would be for future legislation that would threaten ONS classification?
Minister. Said many times. I mean, first of all, that is a decision overall for ONS. The responsibility that we have, and my officials and I, my ministerial colleagues, have carried that responsibility very carefully through this process and thoughtfully, is to make sure that we're not exerting control over universities. And you will have heard that, as I know the member listens very carefully, through the way I've dealt with stage 2 proceedings and even stage 3 today. Presiding Officer, a vote for this bill is a vote for significant change. It is a vote for colleges, universities and training providers to work more cohesively to deliver high-quality, future-ready education and training. It is a vote for cutting through bureaucracy, improving funding flows and maximising public value. It is a vote for a more efficient, aligned, responsive and a collaborative system. It is a vote for taking further steps to prevent gender-based violence and to advance fair work. And it is a vote for widening out access so more people get the chance to study at college and higher education institutions. The significant change that this bill will take forward includes, of course, expanding the Scottish Funding Council's role. Will be a fundamental redesign of the tertiary education and skills landscape. The SFC will be expected to evolve its structures, capabilities and culture, and they are ready for that. Throughout this bill process, members have raised legitimate questions about the capacity, culture and accountability of the SFC, and I have heard that in the debate today. And I assure Parliament that I have engaged with the SFC to make sure that those points were probed. And I am confident the SFC will build strong and lasting partnerships with employers. Apprenticeships will continue to reflect the needs of business and the wider economy, and there will be significant input from and collaboration with businesses. And apprenticeships will be made more accessible to young people facing barriers, and also those retraining and upskilling. With all of that the SFC is taking on, some members have highlighted that the name Scottish Funding Council will no longer reflect the extent of what it does. And I think this is an important point to consider. Willie Rennie indeed raised this today. Changing the name in law could have required hundreds of technical amendments to the 2005 Act, and that would not have been a good use of parliamentary time. But I do think it's important that we consider the name which the SFC is known and operates in practice in the future, and to make sure that its descriptor fully represents all that it will do. And so I'm open to ideas on what that may be from members and from the business community and more widely. Presiding Officer, this bill was introduced to Parliament almost a year ago, but the work did not start there. We are building on strong foundations and on a commitment that began when this government decided in 2008 to ensure that no young person was denied the opportunity to fulfil their potential in education or in life due to economic disruption, given the financial crisis at that time. And I want to thank all of those who have been involved since that juncture, including in particular tonight those at SDS. And as we move forward on that strong ground, thanks to them. James Withers and his work through his excellent skills review and report was what set us on this path. He made clear what many recognised, that improvement to Scotland's skills landscape was necessary and overdue, and that is why we cannot delay. In the words of James Withers, there is much that is good in the current system, which has served Scotland's needs well. But now we need to create a system which allows users to meet the opportunities and challenges ahead and meet the scale of the transformation facing us. Doing this may be the most important element of national infrastructure investment that we could make over the next decade. So let's rise to that call together. Let's do what's necessary for now and to get ready for what's ahead. And so in that spirit, I move that the Tertiary Education and Training Funding and Governance Scotland Bill is passed.
Thank you. That concludes the debate on the Tertiary Education and Training Funding and Governance Scotland Bill at Stage 3. It's now time to move on to the next item of business, which is consideration of Parliamentary Bureau Motion 20496 on committee meeting times. And I ask Graham Day on behalf of the Parliamentary Bureau to move the motion.
Moved, Presiding Officer.
Thank you, Minister. The question will be put at decision time. And there are two questions to be put as a result of today's business. The first question is that motion 20484, in the name of Ben Macpherson, on the Tertiary Education and Training Funding and Governance Scotland Bill at Stage 3 be agreed. And as this is a motion to pass the bill, the question must be decided by division. So I would ask members who have been voting all afternoon to refresh their screens. Okay. The question is that motion 20484 in the name of Ben Macpherson on the Tertiary Education and Training Funding and Governance Scotland Bill at Stage 3 be agreed, and members should cast their votes now. The vote is closed. I call Neil Bibby for a point of order.
I would have voted no, Presiding Officer.
Thank you, Mr Bibby. We'll ensure that's recorded. The result of the vote on motion 20484 in the name of Ben Macpherson is yes 75, no 46. There were no abstentions. The motion is therefore agreed, and the Tertiary Education and Training Funding and Governance Scotland Bill is passed. Thank you. And the next question is that motion 20496 in the name of Graham Day on behalf of the Parliamentary Bureau on committee meeting times be agreed. Are we all agreed? The motion is therefore agreed. That concludes decision time and I close this meeting.